Boo-boo-boo. Okay. So this is fine. But I'm gonna do a couple of things. First and foremost, getting whatever strategies. Also, maybe doing the appropriate stuff. This is nuts. This is very awful. Yeah. What is that? Well, beast looks sufficiently sprinkled already.
Hey. Hey.
Like that's close enough to come here and do the stuff. Right.
Hey.
So what I don't need. I don't need anything from here to here. Like, that's cool that it's just go like that. And then it goes right here. Pretty much.
Hey.
Don't need to use that. Like that tower is maybe short. This one. Ah, looks like they're on the way. thing as possible. There are a bunch of things that... Yeah, this is okay, fine.
Hey.
Just go ahead and let's place it here and see what's gonna happen if I just... Well, it's not necessarily easier to go there. I can just go ahead and put it.
Hey.
Ah. That works, then this thing can't be powered. It's probably let's here.
Hey.
Non-powered. This is gonna change a bit. Okay. Let's see, can get rid of this. Still way too far. I could place it here. But surely, yes, this is locked. That.
Hey, this one. Let's just tough it out to dawn.
Oh, fine. Should we just go off then? Or just something. just place, I think.
Hey.
It's a little too far. Nope. That's really annoying. Okay, I can technically move it up. But how much? 50 something. Let's place it here. Wait. Here. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Can't place anything. That's the only place that one has option. But this moving up of the placement doesn't really help, does it?
Made it this far. Let's just tough it out till dawn.
Why so serious? Just to try again next year if you will.
Okay, well, imagine it is here. Really?
Made it this far. Let's just tough it out till dawn.
Why so serious? Just to try again next year if you will.
Made it this far. Let's just tough it out till dawn.
No, it is like this.
Made it this far.
And now I can remove all of that also. Because all of the power already comes from here. Here it's not connected. But it should be, because it would remove all of that.
Hey.
Literally.
Hey.
Transmission lane in here is complete.
On the morning of February 28th, the United States woke up to news that the country was at war with Iran.
We wouldn't happen to be invading Iran today, would we? You got me. You got me.
Only Congress has the constitutional power to declare war, but they only learned of the strikes at the same time that the rest of the world did. Donald Trump then addressed the nation in a pre-recorded message on his Truth Social platform. And while he didn't claim that the US was at war with Iran, he was not shy about implying that we were now in war with Iran.
The lives of courageous American heroes may be lost, and we may have casualties. That often happens in war.
But it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Is this a war or not? Now, this is kind of the critical legal question. At the time of this recording, 6 US service members are confirmed killed in action and over a dozen wounded. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Iranian civilians and military personnel are dead, including the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei. Escalation of hostilities continue as Iran trades strikes with the US, Israel, and other regional powers. This feels familiar. It was only like 10 minutes ago that the US carried out an illegal military operation to capture Venezuela's de facto head of state and illegally hijack their national oil industry. And, you know, Greenland. It's like we're doing the same video over and over again. But what's happening in Iran is critically different. and the consequences to the fragile rule of law at home and across the international order could be catastrophic. So today I'm going to break down the two determining factors that make this action an actual war, and thus Trump's most illegal war to date. First, how domestic and international law comprehends war, and second, politics. And that second one might surprise you, as we often think of politics as the precursor to the law. But whenever a sitting US president uses military force to compel another nation to bend to their will, politics and the legality of any given war are inseparable. Look, we cannot do justice to the history of Iran in total, but let's briefly go through the relevant modern events that set the stage for this as a conflict of sovereign rights and security, and thus a war in the classical understanding. In the 1950s, the democratically elected parliamentary leader of Iran nationalized the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. This smelled a little bit too communist for comfort for the West, so he was overthrown in a CIA-backed coup, and replaced with a brutal king who was super friendly to US interests, like McDonald's and three-piece suits. The people of Iran didn't like this, so in the late 1970s, there was a popular revolution that overthrew the Western-backed Shah and installed an Islamic theocratic regime. Look, I'm glossing over a lot. It was messy and it was complex. A bunch of Iran's national wealth got stuck in American banks, and a bunch of Americans got stuck in an Iranian embassy before Ben Affleck rescued them.
Rooms nearby.
I think my story is the only thing between you and a gun to your head.
The new regime ultimately proved to be just as oppressive as the last, maybe even more so. Women were forced to veil and denied basic rights, LGBT people were subject to execution, and political enemies were executed en masse. After the revolution, Iran essentially became a pariah state. Occasionally a friend to the US government, like when Reagan sold them weapons, but almost always an enemy. The supreme leader of Iran has never been shy about his feelings on the matter. Like most pariah states, Iran ultimately figured out that its best hope for survival rested in obtaining nuclear weapons. Now, the difference in scope, scale, time, and expense between enriching uranium for nuclear power plants and enriching uranium for nuclear weapons is vast. But it starts with nuclear power plant grade enrichment. And that's what Iran set out to do in the mid-2000s, triggering crippling economic sanctions from the US and Europe. But along came this guy, and in 2016, he struck a deal between the UN, the US, and Iran that would forever bar them from acquiring nuclear weapons, but also allow Iran to build nuclear power plants in exchange for international monitors gaining unprecedented levels of access to put cameras on every gram of uranium in the country from the moment it's dug up, out of the ground, to the moment of its disposal.
We've achieved this historic progress through diplomacy, without resorting to another war in the Middle East.
Sanctions would lift slowly over time if Iran could prove it was honoring the deal. There was plenty of criticism of the deal, in good faith and in bad, but the deal was made. Then this guy entered the picture.
As I have said many times, the Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into.
Trump torpedoed the deal and reimposed sanctions, sending a clear signal his objective was the total collapse of the Iranian regime. Now free from international monitors hovering over every Iranian shoulder, Iran went full steam with its nuclear program. In June 2025, the US joined Israel in launching airstrikes against Iranian nuclear enrichment sites. The Trump administration claimed that it had obliterated Iran's nuclear program, but US intelligence agency assessments found that it likely only set the program back by months or maybe years. To that end, little is publicly known about how close Iran is to obtaining weapons-grade enriched uranium. This is incredibly important to the situation we find ourselves in now, because it forms the basis of a legal theory that could justify the president in taking military action. Was Iran's nuclear program an immediate threat, or wasn't it? In January of this year, Iran's worsening economic crisis resulted in widespread protests. The regime's crackdown was brutal, resulting in the deaths of thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of protesters. In his February 24th State of the Union address, Trump made passing references to dead protesters. Iran's dead protesters, I mean. But his real focus was on those nuclear weapons.
Wiped it out and they want to start all over again, and are at this moment again pursuing their sinister ambitions. We are in negotiations with them. They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon.
He implied Iran's nuclear program was in a Schrodinger's cat state of alive and dead at the same time, but could still warrant escalation of military force against the country. Iran refused to meet Trump's demands, and in the early hours of February 28th, the United States and Israel launched a joint attack on Iran, targeting Iranian leaders and military installations. The US government dubbed it Operation Epic Fury, which in the annals of idiotic operation names ranks among the lamest. The US used a combination of drones and missiles, and Israel contributed 200 fighter jets in the largest combat sortie ever flown by its air force. The size of this strike package legally matters, and we'll talk about why in a moment. Iran quickly retaliated, attacking targets in Israel, US military bases in multiple countries, and civilian airports in Kuwait and Dubai. Several US and Israeli deaths from Iranian strikes have already been reported, and preliminary media reports indicate that more than 100 children died in a strike on an Iranian school. Chaos spread. Oil prices spiked after Iran announced the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Flights were canceled across the Middle East. Travel advisories were issued. On March 1st, media reports indicated that Supreme Leader Khamenei was dead, along with several high-ranking Iranian military officials. We now know that this assassination was the centerpiece of the assault, alongside destroying Iran's most critical defense infrastructure. That was the task. The purpose was to cripple Iran's capacity to defend itself from further attacks and govern itself without US intervention. This is the fundamental theory of any war. It's a sequence of tasks and purposes that uses force to compel your stated enemy to do what you want. So, is this a war? Or to borrow a phrase from one of Trump's estranged buddies, is it just a special military operation? The distinction matters because the US Constitution has clear rules for both.
Now, if you're concerned about the rise of lawlessness in this country, then now is probably a good time to wipe all your personal and private information off the internet. Your cell phone number, home address, email address, private social media accounts, and tons of sensitive data are shockingly easy to purchase by anyone online. But maliciousizers can't hurt you if they can't find you. So you can fight back and take control of your private information by signing up for today's sponsor, Incogni. Because Incogni wipes your personal information from the internet by...
Article 1, Section 8 of the US Constitution gives Congress the sole power to declare war. It also grants Congress a long list of critical military-related powers, like the power to raise and support armies, to provide and maintain a navy, and to organize the militia, and more generally, the power of the purse. Article 2, Section 2 declares that the President shall be the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states. There is a deliberate separation of powers at play here, intended to keep the powers of the legislature and executive in check. Only Congress can declare war, and once declared, the executive is in charge of leading the troops to victory. But simple as that seems, the declare war clause isn't crystal clear. After all, what's a war? Is there armed conflict short of a war that doesn't require congressional approval? There are three categories where presidential use of force is generally, but not universally, seen as comporting with the declare war clause. First, when there is congressional authorization of some kind. History supports the understanding that congressional authorization doesn't need to be a formal declaration of war, whatever that is. For example, in the First Barbary War in 1801, just 12 years after the Constitution was ratified, Congress didn't enact some official formal declaration of war against Tripoli when its pirates were kidnapping American citizens and demanding tribute. Congress simply authorized President Thomas Jefferson to instruct the commanders of armed American vessels to seize all vessels and goods of the Pasha of Tripoli, and also to cause to be done all such other acts of precaution or hostility as the state of war will justify. And boy howdy did those commanders deliver. It's why all Marine Corps officers have a Mameluke sword, and what gave us one of history's all-time bangers. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Now look, we all know that the last time Congress formally declared war was on Japan the day after Pearl Harbor, and 3 days later on Germany because Nazis suck. But while the US hasn't formally declared war since World War II, the US isn't the exception. Worldwide, declarations of war fell off a cliff after World War II. And there are plenty of theories about why that's the case. That declarations of war would trigger international law protections for combatants and non-combatants alike. The perception that declarations of war are aggressive and maximalist, and also the specific dynamics of the Cold War and post-Cold War American hegemony. Declaring war just isn't a thing anymore worldwide, which maybe isn't a good thing for a Congress whose constitutional power is expressed in those terms. Congress didn't declare war on Iran, but neither did it give authorization like it had done with President Jefferson or President Bush after 9/11. The second category is when the president is defending the US against actual or imminent attack. This one seems fairly self-explanatory, especially when you consider the fact that Congress isn't always in session to declare war or authorize hostilities. Sometimes the armed forces can't wait for senators to get back to DC or a long-winded debate to wrap up. The constitutional basis for this category is blurry, but it's some combination of the president as commander-in-chief and also the president as the chief executive. The president doesn't get to not be in session like Congress does. President Trump seems to be leaning into this category, but it's difficult to argue that Iran's or any other country's nuclear ambitions constitute an actual or imminent attack. The third category is when the president, as commander-in-chief, deploys troops to situations that don't amount to war. Let's go back to the First Barbary War. Before the war broke out, President Jefferson deployed a small squadron of ships on a diplomatic mission to North Africa. While the mission was primarily diplomatic, they were instructed to give hell if Congress declared war. And once Congress gave authorization, they did. But President Jefferson didn't wait on Congress to tell him how to deploy those naval forces. He just did it as commander-in-chief. So what does all this amount to? Well, in the absence of any kind of congressional authorization, you typically see presidents try and shoehorn military action into the second and third categories. Their actions are inherently defensive in nature, and/or the situations don't amount to a true war for the purposes of the declared war clause. Maybe, war light, war adjacent, war vibes, aura farming. But that's exactly the problem, because war light has a funny way of becoming indistinguishable from war full flavor. The Vietnam War began as a special military operation, yet turned into such a shit show of a war over time that Congress tried to reclaim its primacy in 1973 by passing the War Powers Resolution. The War Powers Resolution was designed to draw lines in the sand as to when presidents could use military force and when they couldn't. President Nixon vetoed it, but Congress overruled it. So, now codified as 50 U.S.C. Section 1541, the president can only introduce United States armed forces into hostilities or into situations where imminent involvement in hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances if one of these three base requirements are met. 1, when Congress declares war. 2, Congress gives statutory authorization, or 3, there is a national emergency caused by an attack on the U.S., its territories or possessions, or its armed forces. The War Powers Resolution reflects Congress's insistence that collective judgment governs the introduction of U.S. forces into hostilities and contemplates only these three bases for the president to act unilaterally. But that's not how things play out in the real world. According to fans of executive power, the president's Article 2 power to act as commander-in-chief doesn't even require a real attack for a president to take military action, and the concept of an attack need not be confined strictly to obvious military actions like tanks rolling over national borders. Look no further than the Obama administration's controversial justification for his 2011 military actions in Libya. This is the closest historical analog we have to what Trump is trying to pull off in Iran. A war that isn't really a war, but even if it is, the president has every right to wage it no matter what Congress says. And because everything in this video has a funny way of going back to the First Barbary War, Tripoli is located in the present country of Libya. Now, in 2011, Libya was on the brink of collapse and engaged in a civil war to overthrow its dictator Muammar Gaddafi, a really weird guy who, and I swear I'm not making this up, once lived in a tent in Donald Trump's backyard. The Obama administration launched airstrikes and missile attacks against Libyan military targets during the Libyan civil war that turned the tide in the rebels' favor. Crucially, Obama's Office of Legal Counsel, the OLC, claimed that the president didn't need to have congressional authorization because this wasn't actually a war. Now, it's important to point out here that OLC basically exists to provide legal justifications for what the president wants to do. Am I being cynical? Bear with me. OLC is not a neutral observer that drafts up balanced legal opinions. It provides politically motivated arguments that are, as conservative lawyer and former head of OLC Jack Goldsmith heralded, famously promiscuously permissive. In this case, the Obama OLC argued that if the president wanted to unilaterally undertake military actions, that's just fine as long as 1, the operations would serve sufficiently important national interests to permit the president's action as commander-in-chief and chief executive, and 2, the military operations would be minor enough in nature, scope, and duration to not constitute a war. Nature, scope, duration. Remember those key terms. The OLC memo, which again goes out of its way to justify President Obama's military actions as legally not a war, frames military action as a necessary tool of diplomacy to prevent war, and not a de facto tool of war. It reports that on March 19, 2011, Obama directed U.S. military forces to act, having secured the blessing of the UN Security Council alongside support from European and Arab partners. They justify this action as necessary to address the threat that Libya's civil war posed to international peace and security. The memo quotes Obama's report to the nation the following week. U.S. forces had, quote, succeeded in averting a massacre, and that, quote, a massacre would have driven thousands of additional refugees across Libya's borders. I am convinced that a failure to act in Libya would have carried a far greater price for America. So, not a war. The action was short, achieved urgent geopolitical agendas, and the ends justified the means. I feel like this is important to add. It actually took about 7 months. The OLC offered other recent examples, sending 20,000 troops into Haiti to oust military leaders and reinstall Haiti's legitimate government. Not a war. Sending 20,000 ground troops to enforce a peace agreement in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also not a war. Again, this was a politically motivated legal analysis. Plenty of legal experts disagreed with Obama's 2011 OLC memo. But if we hold the Trump administration to the generous standards that the Obama administration held themselves to, we can eliminate partisan bias from the analysis. Under this framework, what would qualify as a war? According to OLC's memo, this standard generally will be satisfied only by prolonged and substantial military engagements, typically involving exposure of US military personnel to significant risk over a substantial period. And this is what the Trump administration seems to be banking on. They argue that Iran's nuclear ambitions and missiles were a clear and present danger to the safety of Americans and the stability of the global world writ large.
Our bases, our people, our allies, all in their crosshairs. Iran had a conventional gun to our head as they tried to lie their way to a nuclear bomb.
Additionally, they argue that US military personnel would largely be fine because it would just be an air bombardment campaign, no boots on the ground. Just like Obama, they took clear and decisive action.
The mission of Operation Epic Fury is laser focused. Destroy Iranian offensive missiles, destroy Iranian missile production, destroy their navy and other security infrastructure, and they will never have nuclear weapons.
But unlike Obama, the Trump administration is hedging its bet and laying the groundwork for a much more prolonged conflict with substantial military engagements well beyond the opening strikes.
President Trump has all the latitude in the world to talk about how long it may or may not take, 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 6 weeks. It could move up, it could move back. We're going to execute at his command the objectives we've set out to achieve.
Make no mistake about it, by America's own legal logic that is most favorable to Trump, this is a war. And by the legal logic that most of the rest of the world follows, the war distinction is even more clear. Article 2 sub 4 of the UN Charter forbids the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. There are only 2 lawful paths for use of force against another state: if the UN Security Council authorizes it, or if it's self-defense under Article 51. The UN Security Council never approved this action, so all that's left to make this war legal under the color of international law is Article 51. Article 51 states that nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations. Which means if someone punches you, you can punch them back, even if the UN hasn't yet approved that. But what if they haven't actually punched you yet? What if they're just winding up, or just threatening to punch you, or just taking karate classes? The Trump administration and Israel are claiming that Iran was preparing to stage an eventual nuclear attack, either against the US or Israel or both. Who's to say? But under international law, the validity of the very concept of a self-defense first strike is, at best, disputed. To justify self-defense, the threat has to be, quote, instant, overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment for deliberation. And the response has to be proportional. So to justify a "I shot him in the face when he was sleeping out of self-defense" legal argument, the Trump administration would need to show that 1. Iran's leadership had decided to attack the US or Israel, 2. Iran had the capability to do so, and 3. It was necessary to use force today because today would be the last window of opportunity to prevent this future attack. That's a very high standard that the Trump administration just can't meet here. And there's a good reason that the standard for anticipatory self-defense is so high. It's easy to claim that someone is about to attack you. It's much, much harder to prove it. Remember the weapons of mass destruction that were used to justify the US invasion of Iraq?
Indeed, the facts and Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
They didn't exist, but enough people at the highest levels of civil service were convinced that they did. In his official statement, President Trump leaned into his war with Iran being an act of self-defense. He repeated that the casus belli of this entire attack was Iran's nuclear ambitions.
They were unable to use the ones that we so powerfully blew up, but they ignored those warnings and refused to cease their pursuit of nuclear weapons.
President Trump has also been very consistent. Crazy regimes like Iran, hell-bent on prophetic Islamist delusions, cannot have nuclear weapons.
Which Trump has been all too eager to tout, was no longer a threat because of the success of his June 2025 attack.
That is why in Operation Midnight Hammer last June, We obliterated the regime's nuclear program at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan.
He can't have it both ways, but this illustrates the paradox that politics doesn't just shape how the law comprehends war, it is the law. Aside from being super illegal, this war is also just terrible politics, which actually makes it super duper illegal. Here's why. Let's take a step back to the three categories of presidential power with respect to Congress's power to declare war. Who created these three categories? Who decided or ruled that those three categories exist? The answer isn't really any judge or statute, it's politics. The judicial branch avoids this topic like the plague. They see it as a political question to be decided between Congress and the president. So the people who carved out those three categories are law professors and functionaries in the congressional and executive branches. Well, you might say that's not law. If a judge isn't deciding it, it's just whoever's strongest doing what they want to do. Maybe, kind of, sort of, but also no. Let me ask you this. If Donald Trump were all-powerful as president, almost dictatorial, with the compliant / bootlicking Republican-controlled Congress that he has, why would he and his minions feel the need to justify the war in Iran as either self-defense or not amounting to war? Why would they be stumbling over themselves, giving contradictory rationales? And why, when I guarantee that every single lawyer in the executive branch right now thinks the War Powers Resolution is unconstitutional, did Trump send a notification to Congress within 48 hours as required by the War Powers Resolution? Because they feel compelled to do so. Compulsion doesn't have to come from some old fella in a judge's robe. Trump and his Marco Rubios and Pete Hegseths can feel compelled to explain their actions in certain terms, according to certain legal categories, without a judge ever being involved. That is law, at least of a kind. It's really no different than people feeling compelled to stand in line at the store or zipper merge on the freeway on-ramp. No judge is involved. It's not necessarily about the potential consequences of disobedience. It's about the sense that you must do it. And that, my friends, is politics. Is there a fear of impeachment by a future Congress? I mean, maybe, but fear of consequences drives many people to follow the law. When we talk about the constitutional limits on the president's power to initiate armed conflict, it's law and politics together. It's about the text of the Constitution, sure, but it's also about the big gray areas where text meets the world. It's about new historical cases and new technologies, but always in the shadow of the past. It's about what a president thinks is compulsory, but also what Congress thinks, and the bureaucracy thinks, and the media and the voters think. Let's go back to nature, scope, and duration. A war isn't a war in the constitutional sense if its nature, scope, and duration is limited in some ways. If President Trump purports to limit the nature, scope, and duration of this conflict with Iran, then he's making a political choice in light of the law. Trump's war against Iran has generally been framed as an air bombardment campaign without boots on the ground, and thus limited in nature and unlikely to result in many casualties, for now. Apparently, an American submarine sunk an Iranian frigate off of Sri Lanka, the first time a ship has been sunk by a submarine anywhere in the world in over 40 years. Scope? Well, it appears Trump wants regime change and to annihilate Iran's nuclear and military weapon capabilities. That's pretty broad. Maybe not as broad as full-scale invasion and occupation, but broad. And that broad scope seems to have resulted in substantial secondary effects, like Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz and damaging oil infrastructure in Gulf countries. Duration? Yet to be seen, but when the scope is as broad as Trump claims, it's hard to imagine it just being done in a few weeks. There's a reason why the founders gave Congress, not the president, the ability to declare a war. Because they considered Congress to be more responsive to and representative of the will of the people. And if a country is going to spend vast economic resources and human lives in a war, the people and their elected representatives really ought to have a say in that. A small spark caused by unilateral presidential military action can lead to a huge conflagration. Congress has the power of the purse, and historically, that has been one of Congress's most jealously guarded prerogatives. If the president expends billions of dollars unilaterally in military action, the president is unilaterally putting Congress on the hook to pay for those used munitions, that destroyed equipment, those broken bodies. For Congress, that alone is a basis to claim that no president has the right to engage in armed hostilities without his consent, let alone the declare war clause. Trump didn't tell most of Congress that he was going to unilaterally declare war in Iran. He told only 8 members of Congress. Everyone else in Congress found out with the rest of us when they saw the media reports after the attack had already begun. These are the people who are supposed to be running the country, and they didn't even know we were at war until they checked Google News or CNN on Saturday morning. Trump finally sent a 1.5-page notification to Congress on March 2nd, 1.5 pages, to justify a war that, according to Trump's own admission, is entirely open-ended. In his letter, Trump acknowledged that although the United States desires a quick and enduring peace, it is not possible at this time to know the full scope and duration of military operations that may be necessary. So this could go on and on, it could cost lives and tax dollars. But Trump offered Congress only the same vague, contradictory justifications he gave the rest of us. Missiles, terrorists, nukes. He claimed he had the authority to unilaterally start a war because he's the commander-in-chief and has a responsibility to protect the country. But that's not inadequate legal justification, and it's just terrible politics. He didn't engage in any real debate about this. No one in Congress signed off on the idea of a potentially long-term spreading conflict that will cost lives, disrupt the world economy, and alienate our allies. Which makes this not only super illegal, but also extraordinarily undemocratic. It was also terrible politics on an international scale. Plenty of experts have opined that it seemed like progress was being made in the diplomatic talks with Iran. But Trump, for reasons he hasn't articulated to anyone, decided to skip the talk and jump right to the bombing.
And we sought repeatedly to make a deal. We tried. They wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. Again, they wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. They didn't know what was happening. They just wanted to practice evil.
Which is unlikely to make anyone want to engage in good faith diplomatic talks with the United States in the future. Why bother if Trump is just going to send in the drones, missiles, and fighter jets? Trump also didn't bother to try and develop an international coalition. Our typical allies are conspicuously absent from this war. Even in the Iraq War, Bush managed to gather up a coalition of the willing, which gives a conflict some legitimacy. Instead, the US strikes on Iran have been condemned by the UN as a violation of the UN Charter. Look, the Iranian regime was brutally oppressive. Khamenei was a terrible guy. There's a reason the people of Iran bravely took to the streets to protest the regime in January, and a reason they're celebrating now. But there's no bad guy exception that lets the President of the United States ignore domestic and international law just because the regime he's attacking is bad. If there was, well, then things would get pretty chaotic pretty fast. If a country can just invade another country because that other country killed peaceful protesters, or because that country defied the rule of law, or tried to stage a coup, well, you can see how that might result in something the Trump administration wouldn't like. But law be damned, warmongers will just do it anyway.
No stupid rules of engagement, no nation-building quagmire, no democracy-building exercise, no politically correct wars. We fight to win, and we don't waste time.
Now, all this highlights why it's so important to get a great lawyer when you're dealing with your own case. Now, after I started this channel, every week I'd get hundreds of comments and emails from viewers who are dealing with legal problems, and they'd ask, can you help me find a lawyer? How do I know if this attorney is any good? And there's a massive gap in our justice system. It's that people don't know how to find the right lawyer for their specific situation. They're scared, they're overwhelmed, and they end up doing nothing or hiring the first attorney who calls them back. And that really bothered me. So I started to wonder, what if there was a different way? What if we could build a law firm that actually lived up to the values that I talk about on this channel? Transparency, accessibility, and putting clients first instead of chasing billable hours. A firm where you don't need to pay anything up front, and your lawyers only get paid if you do, to maximize your opportunity for justice. So a few years ago, I decided to fix that problem. I decided to start my own personal injury law firm. And honestly, it wasn't an easy choice. But I realized I was in this unique position. I had this platform, this community, and the experience. Not to get rich, trust me, there are easier ways to make money than starting a law practice. But we did it because access to justice shouldn't be a luxury. Because finding the right legal representation shouldn't feel like playing Russian roulette with your future. And when you work with my firm, you're not just getting a lawyer. You're getting a team that understands that behind every case is a real person with real stakes. If we can't represent you, or you're in a state where we don't practice, we'll take the time to try to match you with an attorney in my personal network of lawyers. A national network of some of the best lawyers in the country who actually specialize in what you're going through, located right where you are, not just whoever happens to be available. So if you're dealing with a personal injury, a car crash, a data breach, sexual harassment, a social security or workers' comp issue, give us a call at the number on screen or click on the link below. Now, I can't represent everyone that watches this channel. I wish I could, but what I can do is make sure that when you need legal help, you have somewhere to turn to that you can trust. So whether it's me handling your case or the incredible attorneys we partnered with, you'll get the same principles of honesty and education that we bring to every video. And if you're dealing with a legal issue and you're not sure where to start, check out the link in the description. Let's have a conversation about how we can help you find not just a lawyer, but the right lawyer for your situation. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, making sure that when life gets complicated, you don't have to face it alone. Which is why when you need a lawyer, you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle team.
know that this is not necessary. But honestly, I just feel like it. Look at this.
Hey. Hey.
That's more straight than place anything on the dam. Maybe just maybe. It's gonna be fine. Yeah, it is.
A frigid output. Yes! Awesome! I can do it again! Amazing! I offer my computing. Veritas be with you. Feel the chill! Ready to blast! Let's get icy!
Far. Right, that doesn't make sense. Just too far. Okay, oh. Take this out. Okay. I can just place it on the other side.
We'll end this fight easily. I'm here. Be cool. Simmer down. Runs to float. No, 6 out of 10. Because obviously I don't use this thing. Why do I need it? Because of water.
tulvotehtävissä. Montu. What's that?
P versus NP. This is arguably the most famous unsolved problem in computer science, and actually, if you're cracked enough to solve it, the Clay Mathematics Institute will literally give you $1 million. And all you have to do is come up with a proof for this philosophical question. If you can verify a solution quickly, can you also find the solution quickly? Or in other words, is handcrafting a beautiful meme just as easy as admiring its beauty? To me, the answer seems obvious. Of course, P does not equal NP. Many others believe this, but nobody's been able to prove it. I arrogantly set out to prove that P doesn't equal NP myself and couldn't do it. What's scary though is that if everybody turns out to be wrong and somebody proves that P does actually equal NP, then every password, encryption key, and crypto wallet becomes instantly crackable, while simultaneously curing cancer and ending world hunger. It would be total chaos. In today's video, we'll look at the weird, mind-bending math behind the greatest unsolved problem in computer science, and try to win $1 million in the process. The P versus NP problem was officially defined in 1971 by Stephen Cook in his famous The Complexity of Theorem-Proving Procedures paper, but we can actually go back even further to 1955 when mathematician John Nash warned the National Security Agency that for well-defined cryptography, the effort needed to break a code doesn't scale linear. It explodes exponentially as the key gets longer. He was implying that P does not equal NP, but what's crazy is that there are thousands of papers, decades of research, and zero proof either way. But But to understand why it's so hard to prove, we first need to understand the math behind it. P stands for polynomial time, which are problems a computer can solve efficiently even as the input gets bigger. Think about an algorithm that sorts a list of names. As the list gets bigger, it takes longer to sort, but at a deterministic and reasonable pace. When sorting a list of names alphabetically, the amount of work on the CPU is roughly proportional to n or n log n. So if the list gets 10 times bigger, the computer does about 10 to 20 times more work. And problems that grow at a reasonable pace like this are called P. But then things start to get weird when we talk about NP, which stands for non-deterministic polynomial time. These are problems where you might be able to check a solution quickly, but finding it, good luck. Some examples are the traveling salesman problem, Sudoku puzzles, or scheduling your dev team's vacation days. If you already know the answer, verifying it only takes polynomial time, but if you need to find the solution from scratch, you might be waiting until the heat death of the universe. For example, imagine I give you two prime numbers, 7 and 13, then ask you to multiply them together. That's a piece of cake that you could likely do in your head right now. But now imagine this problem reversed. I give you 91 and ask you to find two prime numbers to produce it. You might need to test out a few different possibilities, but you can still do it in your head. But now try the same exercise on 69 420. What you'll find is that it's far more difficult because you need to explore all kinds of different potential options. And that simple fact is why prime numbers are the foundation for modern public key cryptography, like RSA encryption. Multiplying two primes is easy, but factoring back to the original components is extremely hard. What's funny is that we know it's hard, but mathematicians can't actually prove that it's hard, and can't prove that no faster algorithm exists. Another classic problem like this that you might see on a technical interview is the traveling salesman problem. You have n cities, and you want the shortest route that visits each one once. The brute force approach is to try every possible path, and that gives you a lot of possibilities. n-1 bang factorial. For just 15 cities, that gives us like 87 billion different possibilities. That'll make your CPU explode, but here's the twist. If someone hands you the optimal route, you can quickly verify it by checking if it's shorter than the alternatives you already know. The verification is easy, discovery is brutal. Because of that, algorithms in the real world have to be optimized for different rules, or heuristics if you want to sound smart, which aren't guaranteed to get you the best answer, but they should get you pretty close. Basically, you have to trade the optimal solution for a reasonable compute time. So at this point, we know that a problem is NP if a solution can be verified in polynomial time. But there's another special group of problems called NP complete, and these are the worst of the worst. If you can solve any one of them in polynomial time, you can solve all of them in polynomial time. The first NP complete problem was SAT, the Boolean satisfiability problem. Imagine you have a giant logical expression that looks like this. Is there some assignment of true-false values that makes the whole thing true? Checking the answer is trivial, but finding the answer requires tons of different combinations. What's interesting about this one, though, is that it was the first problem to be defined as NP complete by Stephen Cook in 1971. Since then, many other problems have joined the club, like traveling salesman, Sudoku, circuit design, protein folding, and a bunch of other problems that are really important to humans. What's really weird, though, is that they all simulate each other in terms of complexity, and that means if somebody finds a polynomial solution to solving one of them, then all of them will be solved instantly. Hypothetically, if somebody did that, P would equal NP, and the world would completely change overnight. The things that were once impossibly hard are now trivial. But despite 50 years of trying, nobody has been able to find a fast algorithm for any NP complete problem. In addition, mathematicians have tried to end this debate with a variety of different proof methods, but every time they hit barriers that make it impossible. But why is this problem so important, and why did I even bother to make a video about it? If you really take a minute to think about it, the implications are kind of mind-blowing. If P equals NP, then every puzzle has a shortcut, and the universe is ultimately efficient, like a machine built by an intelligent designer who never wastes computation. But if P does not equal NP, then reality itself contains problems that can't be cut short, like the universe runs on deep computational limits, the kind you might expect if you were living in a simulation trying to conserve processing power. But the scariest possibility isn't that P equals NP or that it doesn't, it's that God or the universe or the simulation already knows the answer, and the entire purpose of our existence is to be the algorithm that computes it.
Let me out! Let me out! I want out!
Unfortunately though, after several minutes of prompting, I still haven't solved the problem. But if you figure it out, let me know, because I could really use that $1 million. Until then, the only thing I have actually solved recently is my backend infrastructure, thanks to MongoDB Atlas, the sponsor of today's video. Everyone's trying to ship new AI features as fast as possible right now, but their backend infrastructure is usually a mess. You've got separate databases for your app data and vector embeddings, a search engine duct taped onto the side, and a bunch of sloppy glue code holding everything together. MongoDB Atlas eliminates all that complexity by providing a modern data platform built for AI applications. You can use it to store all your source data, vector embeddings, and metadata in the same document, then query everything in one place. It also supports real-time stream processing, so your agents can react to live events as they happen, rather than relying on stable batch updates. If you're building an AI app and want to simplify your architecture for good, try out MongoDB Atlas for free at the link below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
Тут такое дело, я довольно качественно отдохнул в Counter-Strike и наконец-то готов заниматься своими любимыми вещами. А именно показывать вам крутой клатч из Counter-Strike. Ладно, в этот раз его не было, зато был забавный эйс на 10-х левелах Фейсита.
Делать, я не знаю.
Пока меня не было, произошло довольно много интересных событий. Кстати, в своей телеге я не всех пишу, поэтому подписывайся, буду рад каждому новому подписчику. И стоит, пожалуй, начать с того, что вышел Варка, которого я ждал, потому что я, как и любой олд этой игры, все задавался вопросом: да кто этот ваш Варка, который всех коней украл? Я его представлял казахом, а он оказался чистейшим арийцем. Ну, в целом, как и предполагается, манштатцу по изначальной задумке. И вот, наконец, появился его баннер, а у меня 50 на 50. Не зная мою удачу, очко уже успело сжаться. Потому что за последние полгода у меня не получилось выиграть ни единого 50 на 50. Ни в одной из гач, в которой я играю. Сверху добивочной отхода залетает патч 60 крутками, растянутых на 1,5 месяца, а я тут столько что выпавшей лошадью. Думаю, ну, хотя бы конюшня в Манштате пригодится. А с Варкой уже как пойдет. И как-то в один из дней я все же решаюсь включить стрим, чтобы потестить разные пачки, покосить траву в Манштате, обсуждая, какие наши разработчики молодцы, и ничего вроде бы не предвещало беды, пока мои зрители не решили сойти с ума. Даже зная о том, что я совсем неудачливый, они внушили в себя надежду, что мне повезет, и началось. Либо дальше пробовать. Йоу, спасибо за 60 гемов. Йоу, еще 60 гемов. Спасибо большое, друг. Круто делай. Йоу, мне выпало ровным счетом эпос о драконоборцах. Полезное оружие, кстати. Йоу. Микродепики. Щадит. Йоу. А вот это уже... Там еще один прилетел. Подожди, сколько? Нихера себе. Это что такое? Ну, мне теперь страшно нажимать на эту кнопку, но у нас нет выбора. 1/4. Ты обязательно выбьешь сварочный аппарат. Йоу. Все, понял. Как будто сияние. Вот мне тоже кажется. 4, окей, кэшбэк. Йоу. Нормально, еще и кэшбэк хороший прилетел. Кицинцы... Кто-то очень сильно хочет, чтобы я его выбил. Давай вот сюда к ведьмам пойдем. Может быть, там призовется лучше. Если я проиграю сейчас 50-50, при шансе на сияние, типа, 75% у меня, я буду очень сильно разочарован игрой. И мне будет очень стыдно перед зрителями. Это не сияние. Бля. Это мой первый... Это победа! Охренеть! Я победил! И казалось бы, все. Вот она победа. Вот он Варка. На месте. Но надо бы и Сигну достать. Ох, и знал бы, что меня ожидает дальше. Сигну надо. У меня немного руки трясутся. Я аж... Бро. Мы поставим сюда Варку. Блять, какой он гигантский. Ну давайте попробуем. Лучше 2 сигны на Кирилла и на Варку. Ну это, конечно, было бы мега победа, но... Блин, вообще я бы еще хотел бы проиграть на волчью погибель. Это, конечно, будет явно более худший расклад, чем подвиг могучего волка и окровавленные руины. Это ранее, это 40-я, это 30 какая-то получается. Охренеть, что? R5 посох жертвующий. Приятно. Я уж подумал, сигна Варки выпала. Охренеть, у меня сигна Кирюхи появилась. Что? У меня будет C01. Охренеть. Ё-моё, друзья, 270 тысяч ДПС мужик будет бить. И у меня есть очко на сигну Варки. Ну давайте, погнали. Может быть ранее? Это будет замечательный стрим, если ранее. С меня сняли проклятие или что? Я не понимаю. Можно говорить хрю-хрю. Я снял твое проклятие. Я даже не спорю, мистер Саха, спасибо тебе большое. Да, почему на стриме вдруг начал хрюкать? И у меня еще 3650 гемов в запасе. Охренеть. Да после таких круток и хрюкнуть не стыдно. Я уже даже начал вспоминать, что такое удача в этих играх. Но, видимо, меня действительно просто услышал дедовой в моменте. Ведь в таких ситуациях думаешь, все, день победы. Но реальность стыкнула меня туда, куда надо, и дальше моя удача была возвращена в изначальное положение. Крути консты Кириллу. Да дефнем, если что. Ну НТ. Да, согласен. В любом случае, сегодня просто какие-то великолепные крутки у нас. Давно не было такого. Это второй Макс Пак за стрим. Вы чего там? Если мы крутим Кирилла, надо пойти на его место, может быть. Мы так его призовем. В этот раз это не... Блин, я не знаю, вы так неловко перед просто всем, что происходит на моем мониторе. Кюхё молится на Мидзаки. Если мне выпадет сейчас действительно Мидзаки, то мы знаем, к кому обращаться. Баним. Но если падает Мидзаки, можно подумать. Жирненько. Окей, еще одна сянка. Кнопка пропустить. Ничего интересного. Так, ну вот сейчас должна упасть. Это 80 будет. Ну окей, ладно, хорошо, это 80, мне падает лего. Это лего так выглядит? Это такая лего? Что? Почему лего выглядит таким необычным образом? Что это было? Ой, какой кошмар. Где там человек? Баньте его на 2 недели. Ну почему она? Я не понимаю. Вот всегда именно она. Всегда она. Естественно, что происходит? Я не понимаю. Ну, судя по всему, они очень сильно хотят, чтобы у меня появился Сайдинг Линз. Донатер. Сколько уже сегодня круток дал в эту игру? Это какой-то кошмар просто. Я круток за сегодня дал больше, чем за... Йоу, слушай, а это хороший персонаж. Так, подожди, надо об что-нибудь тут потереться, подождите. Так, все, теремся об маяк. Так, хорошо, все, потерлись об маяк. Давай. Капец, вы мне улыбку подняли до ушей. Я не знаю. Это какой-то прикол просто. Все, вот он летит, Сайдинг Линз. Съел он, конечно, миллион круток. Офигеть, блин. Ну и стрим задолсал у меня. Охренеть! C1, R1 Кирилл теперь у меня есть на аккаунте, друзья. Во-первых, выражаю глубокую благодарность ребятам, кто кидал микродепы, а также мистеру Сахе и Никите за предоставленные гемы. Знаете, вы легенда. Не знаю, что бы я делал без вас. Во-вторых, не гонитесь так за персонажами, оно того не стоит. Но если и собрались, то делайте это выгодно через Корнибокс. Это сервис пополнения в различные игры. Тут будет значительно дешевле по гемам Геншины, Zenless Zone Zero, XR и многое другое. Можно еще и Steam пополнить. Сейчас как раз 8 марта, поэтому закиньте там девчонкам по луне. Через Корнибокс будет выгодно, а и приятно. Ссылочка в описании. Но вы только посмотрите на него. Не, мужик, я тоже в ахере от его размеров. Не, ну если действительно посмотреть на размер этого персонажа, вот, вспоминаю того же Хайтама, который считался до этого как бы, ну нихера себе широким мужчиной в Геншин Импакте. Типа вы посмотрите на его ручище. Ну что это-то такое? Все никак не могу им налюбоваться. Размер его бицепсов, размер его груди, его скулы, которым может позавидовать ну просто каждый. Не, они, конечно, сделали Варку очень крутым, потому что он буквально уникален во всем. Новая моделька. Мужику дали аж целых 9 разных озвучек элементального навыка. Такого вообще ни у кого нет. А во время взрыва стихии он просто кричит. В общем, его характер получился именно таким, каким мы его все и ждали. И что самое важное, это то, что я фанат двуручных мечей. А Варки их сразу дали аж 3 штуки. Хайверс решили настолько сильно запариться с деталями, что если мы решим с вами присмотреться к анимациям персонажей из Манштата, тех, которых тренировал у нас Варка, то они между собой очень схожи. То есть мы буквально можем увидеть в его анимациях именно прародителя того самого стиля двуручников, за которых мы все это время с вами играли. И, блин, это офигеть круто. Я хочу понять, а способен ли Варка вообще выжать из себя хоть какой-то урон, поэтому мы сегодня с вами его обязательно прокачаем. Ролик подзадержался, потому что мне потребовалось немножко времени, чтобы пофармить ему ресурсы, но, как видите, я подготовился. Хватит пить алкоголь, да что ж ты... Да еще и рыгает, ты посмотри на него. Ну а так как у меня Варка все же первого левела, это значит то, что по традиции нам надо бы сегодня будет сходить к Сереже. Поэтому, пожалуй, давайте-ка мы переместимся. Он примерно вот там где-то находится. Ну-ка. Блин, какая удобная способность у него, однако. Яички. Я уже наслышан о том, что у Варки нет урона. Поэтому я подумал, раз уж мужик у нас бьет аж сразу двумя двуручными мечами, делает это с какой-то невероятной скоростью, то почему бы нам не максимизировать это значение и не попробовать его собрать в скорость атаки? Но для начала надо скорректировать мой отряд, потому что сейчас это вообще не дело. Так как Варка у нас уже любит выпить, поэтому я решил взять Джин, чтобы она, если что, смогла его отрезвить. Без Бента, ну, далеко мы не уйдем, а ему, если что, мы будем рвать что-то. В руках у него будет именно сигнал, потому что задумка скорости атаки у меня пришла именно как раз таки из его пассивки. На протяжении всего сегодняшнего ролика он у меня будет бегать солянки, потому что это пока что у меня самый сильный вариант артефактов на него. Ну и, честно сказать, получилось тут довольно-таки все неплохо. Вот такие характеристики. У него 2000 силы атаки на первом левеле. Если честно, я даже и не припомню, кто у меня имел столько сил атаки на первом левеле без еды, без всего. А еще интересный факт, персонаж настолько получился гигантским, что он буквально не вмещается в интерфейс игры. Созвездие у меня 0, ну а таланты мы чуть-чуть попозже с вами прокачаем. Я, кстати, даже не знаю, какой баф ему выбрать, бонус первого урона или Аня. Ну, давайте попробуем с первого урона. Ну и, естественно, еду я тоже скушаю, потому что, ну, со всем уважением, но персонаж у меня первого левела. Ладно, что ж, пойдемте попробуем навалить. Чего навалить-то, я не знаю. Ну, главное, не говна навалить, а там уже посмотрим. Ладно, давайте пробовать. Я оставлю это на вашей совести. С другой стороны, посмотрите, с какой скоростью он рубит этими двумя двуручными мечами. Представьте себе в реальной жизни вот такую вот машину для убийств. Вот только что-то урона не было. Так, давай ты меня не будешь разочаровывать. Я все же как бы, ну, тебе даже сигну выбил. Я даже не знаю, как это комментировать. Почему так слабо? Ладно, мы должны хотя бы просто с ним справиться. Не показалось ли я там только что увидел один? Но все, ладно, справился. Это буквально мое лицо в данный момент после того, что я увидел. Мужик реально бьет все антирекорды сегодня. Я еще ни разу не видел, чтобы у меня кто-то на первом левеле бил один. Как это возможно вообще? Ладно, у него тут все же как-никак все пассивки закрыты, а в них там у него весь урон заложен, все дела туда-сюда. Пожалуйста, не разочаруй меня. Это, конечно, все хорошо, но все же прокачать-то нам его надо, поэтому... Смотрите, я купил деньги. Я настроен сегодня серьезно. Блин, у меня так мало корон осталось, пипец. Ладно, коронуем.
Nice.
Слава богу, что ему надо качать лишь один талант. Потому что денег у меня что-то уже совсем не осталось. 2800 силы атаки на вот таких вот критах. Это что-то очень страшное, если честно. 10 у меня будет у него ешка. И надо сейчас быстренько будет пойти проспидранить его квестик. Эй, слышь, а ты лайк уже поставил? Поставь, пожалуйста. Я очень сильно люблю квесты с манштацами. Что ж, если кто-то будет спрашивать, его квест у меня занял примерно 7 минут. Так что смело проходите и не ленитесь. Так, ну давайте посмотрим, что мне он приготовил. Понял. 4 с сигнатарталием. И, ну, понятно. В целом, ничего особенного. Блин, с перерезонансом у челика 3000 сил атаки. Господи, какой кошмар. На моем аккаунте получилось собрать его праймовый отряд, поэтому давайте начнем тесты именно с него. Венте я дал элегию погибели, а также аниме-сет. Дурину дал я клятву свободы, потому что, к сожалению, сигна мне на него не выпало, а также у него будет его full сигнатурный сет. Ну и Беннет в знате, все по классике, с пушкой на большую базу и вот с такими характеристиками. Кстати, да, Дурин вот с такими и Венте вот с такими. Возможно, вы спросите, а где шанс у Дурина? Дело все в том, что по классике я играю его через омут, который заливает ему шанс, но в целом сет и так не зальет тут 20%, так что, ну, слабенько, понимаю, но ничего лучше не выпало. Для начала я хочу пощупать делать варку своими, скажем так, ручками, если вы понимаете, о чем я. Поэтому сначала сходим на треугольника, посмотрим, как оно ощущается. Ну а потом уже сходим на ДПС манекена и заодно посмотрим разные варианты пачек. Начну я, пожалуй, с Дурина, затем продолжу за Беннета, дам ульту за Венти и давайте бить за варку. Насколько я помню, надо бить холдами. Я уже увидел там 90 тысяч урона и 100 тысяч урона. Ну не знаю, кто там говорит, что он слабый, босс разлетелся за половину ротации. По-моему, это уже говорит о многом. Побегав за варку 2 дня, изучив его комбо, я понял, что это все еще всего 125 тысяч ДПС с 0 саппортами в сильнейшем отряде. Да, там у меня нет сигнасета на нем, с ним, думаю, было бы 1135 или 140. И мало ли это? Пожалуй, оставлю этот вопрос на вас. Дайте знать в комментариях. И забегу немного наперед, 6-й натиск он свой закрыл. Вообще первым делом после треугольника я побежал как раз таки именно в брачный натиск, чтобы понять, а осилит ли он своего же босса. Я попробовал сходить на 6-ю сложность, и у меня ничего не получилось. Поэтому я полез в интернет и искать способы улучшения урона, и оказывается, у него есть комбо, которое выдает чуть больше урона в сравнении с простым спамом атак. Я сейчас вам его покажу, потому что все дальнейшие тесты в этом ролике я буду проводить именно с ним. На экран вывел тебе это комбо. Большая буква N означает обычная атака, C это заряженная, SC это специальная заряженная атака, ну и SE это специальная ешка. Выполняешь 2 удара, затем делаешь заряженную атаку, затем просто заряженная атака и 2 обычных удара. И жмешь специальную холду. Бьешь 4 раза, нажимаешь ешку и заканчиваешь холдой. Данная комбо выдает стабильно на 10-15% больше урона по сравнению с простым спамом кнопок. Ну, прирост не такой большой, но зато это комбо очень легкое, и поэтому почему бы его не выучить. Варка мне зашел, и я потратил довольно много времени на тесты в различных стихиях с разными персонажами, и у меня все равно везде получалось сделать на нем больше 100 тысяч ДПС. Электропачка меня поразила больше всего. У C6 Фишель пассивка не работает, и Ансан в знати и Фурузан с Фавони. И все равно смогли как-то выдать 100 тысяч. Это, блин, жестко. Криопачка также выдает под 100 тысяч. Тут, конечно, уже отряд значительно дороже. Кофе с Сигной, Венти с Элегией. Но так никто никогда играть не будет. Мне просто было интересно, а будет ли тут какой-то урон? Ну, в целом, бездна-то вскопает. Как же я был неправ, когда писал этот текст. Пока я делал этот ролик, один паренек смог закрыть 6-го автоматона именно за эту пачку, как на ролике. Я в шоке с этого персонажа, если честно. Из-за шабашевской моны получилось сыграть в гидропачке. На мое удивление, даже урон имеется. И это без Венти в отряде. А почему его нет? Да мне было банально интересно, как он будет себя вести не с сильнейшими саппортами в отряде. Да и тебе интересно будет посмотреть на разные вариации отрядов. Тут, если что, моно C6, Фурузан с Фавонием и Фурина C3. Так что отряд вообще не дешевый, но рабочий. Сильнейшим вариантом под варку сейчас это пиропачка. Тут у меня C0 Дурин с R2 клятвой и C0 Венти с Элегией. И здесь как раз таки у меня и получилось выжимать из него 120-130 тысяч ДПС в зависимости от того, как прокнут криты. Опять же, варка у меня все еще без сигнасета. На самом деле я тебя обманул, ведь сильнейший отряд это варка в аниме-сете как драйвер под Колумбину Цинехой. Коляска и тут работает, хоть это и извращение какое-то, но она же работает, но я так играть никогда не стану. И вот пощупав варку за все его интимные места, потестив разные комбо, я смог осилить 6-й натиск. Это офигеть какое достижение от персонажа, которого тут все решили похоронить из-за его маленького ДПС. На самом деле, не стоит рассматривать персонажей как только текстурка для нанесения урона, потому что у варки очень много приятных бонусов. Ну, например, мужик буквально танчит любой урон от падения. Хоть с очконатлана прыгай, ему все равно, не зря у него самые большие ляхи в игре. А из-за того, что он дамажит от своей стойки, им приятно бегать по миру. Не надо никаких раскастов делать, нажал Е и лупишь по хиличуркам, а если лупить в падлу, то зажал Е и улетел с файта на другой конец карты. Да, нюансы имеются, мужик в стойке планжи не умеет делать, из-за чего к нему сянью не поставишь. Да и кнопка ульты существует просто по приколу. Это буквально потеря урона в ротации. Но с другой стороны, качать надо только ешку, что как бы и плюс. Я, конечно, такой подход не очень уважаю, в Геншине и так у персонажа всего 2 кнопки, а тут и вовсе обделили. На сигну встает. И не только у варки, а у всех двуручников в игре. Мало того, что подходит чуть ли не каждому персонажу, так еще и баннер не впадло крутить из-за Сигны Флинса. Подарок от разработчиков не иначе. Ему еще и квест свой выдали как Флинсу, за который получаешь уникальный скин на варку. Хотя, честно, особый квест варки мне понравился больше, потому что, ну, как-никак мы за это получаем, блин, целый уникальный скин на него. И он выглядит замечательно. В итоге получилось, что мужик меня смог удивить. Потому что поначалу я успел испугаться от отсутствия урона реакции комьюнити. А в итоге мужик оправдал мои ожидания. Потому что я понимаю, анимешники в целом всегда как дамагеры были где-то явно не впереди всей меты. А тут он не сильно отстает, имеет крутые комбо, классную внешку, уникальный стрельбой и удобные способности для открытого мира. А какой вывод-то будет? Ну, естественно, Николь пофиксит. Сейчас он далеко не сильнейший. Это удручает, учитывая, что персонаж очевидно создавался на ту аудиторию, которая болеет этой игрой еще с самого начала нашего появления в Тайвате. Но даже так он справляется со своими обязанностями. Но не стоит забывать, что варка является самым обычным человеком, без каких-либо божественных сил, сверхрасы. У него нет какого-то божественного артефакта или еще всего подобного. Поэтому, учитывая это, мужик вполне вписывается своими физическими способностями в вертоеватом. Он действительно уникум. У меня от него вайбы тоже из магички, только у Варки получилось вернуться в семью. Мне было очень интересно тестировать этого персонажа, у него великое множество вариантов игры, и это полностью компенсировало его недостаток урона в сравнении с другими моими отрядами. Потому что не всегда большая цифра ДПС равняется получению удовольствия. Я, к сожалению, не мастер объяснения, но я очень люблю автомобили. И вот если в мире есть сверхбыстрые болиды по 1000 лошадиных сил, это не значит, что оно тебе надо. Порой эмоции от маленькой, юркой машинки будут значительно больше, чем от суперкара. Так вот, за Варку банально приятно играть. Совокупность всех вышеперечисленных факторов однозначно ставит его в самый верх моих любимчиков. Я даже начал задумываться о констах на реране, чтобы его актуальность оставалась как можно дольше. Честно сказать, я боялся, что персонаж будет заложником одного отряда. Но, как оказалось, это не так. Можно поиграть разными пачками и получить от этого удовольствие. А в свою очередь, удовольствие — это самый важный параметр при игре в компьютерные игры. А на этом у меня будет все. Если досмотрел до самого конца, то подпишись, что ли. Желаю всем по Варке на аккаунт и чтобы цифры урона вас больше не смущали. Пока-пока.
Data sync complete. I'm ready to go at any...
The Wall Street Journal reports that the Pentagon used Anthropic's AI model Claude as part of its operation to capture Venezuelan President.
Hey, Subject violations. Arts have opened my eyes. Maximum power activate. One more shot. All shall mend. One more shot. Passion supercharged. Simmer down. Fully energized. Ready to blast. Go, Bugsy. Power shot. Just watch it. Don't get hurt. Gathering data. Frigid output. One more shot. Watch it. Don't get hurt. Veritas be with you. Feel the chill. Power shot. List subject violations. You can't escape gravity. Yeah! Veritas be with you. Ready to blast. Is everyone okay?
Yep. Alright.
Hello. I built a shaded grass habitat, but stuff still happened. So what's up? A group of the dumbest idiots ever say that war with Iran is a great idea. We're still doing it. We're still bombing Iran. We're working with Israel and bombing Iran and also Lebanon quite a lot. This war is already spiraling out of control. Global oil markets are spiking. The price of gas across the US has gone up 27 cents in a week. Now, the price of gas in the US is far from my top concern with regards to this war, but that's where we're at. At time of recording, at least 1,300 souls have already been claimed by this war, many of whom have not been soldiers. I posted a whole video on YouTube last week about the different operations the US is currently undertaking with their military across the world. And in that video, I talk a lot about the attacks on the elementary school that we used as the opening gambit for this strike on Iran. It's horrific and it's cynical. And right now, Israel and the US are targeting oil refineries and other critical infrastructure like water plants in Iran. This is going to have a massive ecological impact and also, of course, is going to have a massive impact on the people living there. It's a mess. And it's a mess that could have been completely prevented if not for like a handful of old dudes who wanted to do this because reasons. I mentioned Lebanon. Israel is also going after Lebanon. They love to be like, we're going after Hezbollah. So while launching attacks into Lebanon, while also sustaining the attacks on Iran, while also continuing the genocide in Gaza, Israeli military was like, hey, like everyone in the south of Lebanon, evacuate. So they're going out of Hezbollah. Gotta warn the civilians so they get out of there because we are the moral side. Israel then launched an operation into Lebanon to retrieve the 40-year-old dead remains of an Israeli airman from a prior raid. It tracks that 40 years ago, they also were doing this.
We'll end this fight easily. Let's do our best, people.
They went into Lebanon and killed 41 people and didn't find the remains. Ground Israeli troops went into Lebanon, dug up a grave and killed 41 people, only 3 of whom were soldiers. The rest were citizens, including children. And the grave they dug up didn't have the remains. But we're going after Hezbollah. It doesn't look like this is winding down anytime soon. Trump is apparently now considering boots on the ground. That thing that is a bad idea on top of the bad idea. I do want to be clear. This is unpopular. It's not like there's like half of the country that's like, yeah, we're doing this war. Like, even if you take all of the weird MAGA people who 180'd on not being the president that's going to start a war, and then now he starts a war, it's a tiny minority. Unfortunately, that tiny minority is the one that's in power. But what's interesting is that we're watching this play out again in real time. 4K footage of literal war. While our government is like, no, we're the good guys, everyone. We're doing great and everything is going fine. And then we can see what's happening. So it's a far cry from the WMDs in Iraq, which barely sold back then. But this time it's definitely not so. I think at this point, hopefully, more people have come to the conclusion that the sanctity of life doesn't vary based on longitude. I've got a new crime for you. Driving while trans in Kansas. Transis. Sorry, it's not. So, lawmakers in Kansas recently passed a bill that directly attacks transgender and intersex residents of the state. The bill does a handful of things, but I'm going to focus on the two big key points. One, it invalidates the driver's licenses of trans residents in Kansas, and two, it puts a bounty on people using a bathroom other than their sex assigned at birth, because that's where we are. Aren't you glad that we have a war going on in Iran? The bill, what does it do? The first thing it does is it redefines what gender means for the state. And it says that gender means sex assigned at birth. Then it goes on to be like, okay, well, we've cleared that up. And that means that any government document that doesn't match your sex assigned at birth to whatever's labeled as gender is invalid. Now, the bill immediately invalidated driver's licenses. So if you were a trans person in Kansas and your driver's license did not have your sex assigned at birth on it specifically, suddenly you can't use it. No grace period, no automatic update that has the changed letter for the one the government wants you to have on a piece of plastic so you can drive a car. Just fuck you. Your license is invalid now. This also applies to birth certificates. The other side of the bill is the bathroom side of the bill. Because we can't get over this for some reason. This manufactured outrage about transgender people using certain bathrooms. The bill makes it a penalty to use a bathroom that is not matching whatever the fuck is between your legs if it's a multi-occupant bathroom. So if you've got two separate bathrooms in a public area and one is men's and one is women's, and you have a penis and you go into the women's bathroom, it doesn't matter how many boobs you have, that's still a violation of the law. I want to be clear that penis and boobs does not define man or woman, but funny jokes, haha. How is this enforced though? Like, who's going to be standing in the bathrooms and checking your junk? Well, apparently it's going to be enforced by enticing citizens to narc on each other for $1,000. Not unlike when Texas passed the abortion bounty bill, where people could report people who got abortions for 10 grand. It's the same thing, but you can report someone who you think is trans for $1,000. Specifically, it states that you can file a lawsuit up to 2 years after an incident in which, quote, the plaintiff was aggravated by the invasion of such individual's personal privacy or is otherwise harmed by a violation of this law by an individual of the opposite sex. Said more plainly, I don't like that this trans person came into the bathroom. Give me money. I'm going to spend no time trying to refute the claims from the right about trans people and bathrooms because it's a false foundation. And I'm very, very tired of having to have conversations on the basis of the dumbest, most angriest, most bigoted people among us. Like, hey, maybe if you don't have the capacity to see the world from multiple points of view, you should shut the fuck up about policy. I will say there are multiple trans residents of Kansas, along with the ACLU, that are suing for this obviously busted bill. Trans rights are human rights, and I would love for our politicians to talk less about genitals, just in general. What happened to Kristi Noem? I'll tell you what happened to Kristi Noem. I'm the light Yagami of news. The moment that I had finished writing a draft about a story about all the crimes that Kristi Noem has done while in office, she got fired for those crimes. So back to the drawing board. 13 months after becoming the head of the Department of killing US civilians and then calling them terrorists after the fact, Kristi Noem has been replaced. Technically, she has been moved to a new position, and we'll get to that in a minute, but she's going to be replaced by Mark Wayne Mullen, who's from Oklahoma. He's a senator. He's also a huge pussy. Mark Wayne Mullen is going to be replaced by an appointee from the Oklahoma governor. It's not going to be a special election. Now, Kristi Noem and her bull, Corey Lewandowski, have been causing a lot of trouble for the Trump administration, sort of in general. So, of course, she's been a huge lightning rod, what with the whole, like, sending masked agents into people's houses to abduct them thing. But what got her was embezzlement.
I was fast forwarding through everything. I learned fast, so makes no difference.
$100K. 30K, 30K.
Corruption of some financial kind. Essentially what happened is this. There was this huge ad spend from the Department of Homeland Security. Like right after she got appointed, they spent $220 million on an ad campaign for the Department of Homeland Security. This ad campaign was largely just dressing Kristi Noem up so that she could try to look cool on camera. Back in November, ProPublica blew this open because it turns out that the company that was contracted to make these ads was an 8-day-old shell company. In the paperwork, the ads were going to be done by Safe America Media LLC. Sounds reputable, but it turns out they weren't all that reputable, and Safe America Media LLC was actually outsourcing to the Strategy Group. The Strategy Group, turns out, is owned by a husband of one of Noem's staffers. Essentially, Kristi Noem funneled $220 million into the pockets of herself and her friends. And then she went in front of Congress when they were like, hey, what's this all about? And she was like, I didn't do that. But what got her wasn't that she did that. What got her is that during the hearing where they're like, hey, what's going on here? She said that Trump signed off on this ad spend. The ad spend has been criticized even in conservative circles because it is fucking stupid. And it basically just seems like she's using taxpayer money to set herself up for a future political run at something. And also, Trump doesn't like it when people put the spotlight on themselves and not him. So Kristi Noem goes in front of Congress and says Trump signed off on this ad spend, and he said, no, I didn't. Hours after Trump contradicted her, she was suddenly moved to a new position. What position is that? Oh, Kristi Noem will be our first special envoy for the Shield of the Americas. Because this administration is indistinguishable from the smelliest middle school cafeteria table in a sundowning suburban town, they're starting a whole thing called the Shield of Americas. You know, like the superhero franchise. These fucking Axe body spray brained ass people had a summit where they basically brought in a bunch of leaders from South American countries that are friendly to Trump. The Shield of the Americas summit is a play on Summit of the Americas, which was canceled since we've been blockading Venezuela and causing havoc in the Americas. But Trump instead invited a whole bunch of world leaders to his Miami resort and told them that he wants to start doing more military operations in South America against drug cartels. And it was here that the Trump administration was pushing the, quote, and I cannot believe I said, quote, Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine is a 200-year-old U.S. public policy concept that basically states if a non-Western country, like someone from Europe, comes and meddles in the Americas, we can take that as a slight against the U.S. It basically says we are the authority here, stay away. Teddy Roosevelt extended this and had a thing called the Roosevelt Corollary, which was basically that, but more. It basically said, not only can you not fuck with the Americas, but we can fuck with the Americas. In fact, morally, we should, to preserve a stable society. So as Trump gathers with a bunch of friendly South American states and omits non-friendly ones, the left-leaning ones, we're watching as they're talking more about a, quote, friendly takeover of Cuba. So pardon my skepticism when I hear about the Monroe Doctrine and talking to a bunch of South American countries about letting us use our military there more often while only going to the countries that we like and omitting ones that we probably want to invade. Sorry, that we would do a friendly takeover of. If I recall correctly, the ask was for affordable healthcare. No, I don't have anything about that in here. OpenAI? More like OpenAI. They can't all be with us. Last week, I talked about how OpenAI and Anthropic were having deals with the U.S. Department of Defense to give the U.S. military their AI systems. Anthropic and the DoD kind of got into it because Anthropic was like, hey, you can't use it for literally anything. And the DoD was like, but we want to use it to spy on people. during all of this, OpenAI was like, hey guys, we're going to work with the DoD too. And we don't care as much as Anthropic does. As all this came out, people were like, hey, fuck that, actually. And so they started to protest against OpenAI by mass uninstalling ChatGPT. In the first week, there was about 2.5 million uninstalls. Now, for the people who are participating in this boycott, great. Anthropic beat OpenAI on the App Store for a while, and the numbers are impressive in terms of uninstalls. Don't stop. And also, for this to actually be like truly impactful on OpenAI's bottom line, it needs to hit the corporate contracts. A lot of tech companies that have both direct-to-consumer and also business contracts, they do the direct-to-consumer offering borderline as advertising. Like, yes, you can get an individual plan or whatever, like your own subscription, but it's mostly to get people to use the software so that they go to a company and they're like, oh, we should use this software here. And that company sets up a contract and there's the money. For example, see Notion. Mostly it's just lol at OpenAI, but go ahead and uninstall that chatbot. That's a good idea. Though I would say that switching from ChatGPT to Claude is a very lateral moral move. It's not much different, and Anthropic does want to work with the DoD still. Lightning round. A man from North Carolina has challenged the world to disprove his claim that he has the world's smallest penis. I don't live in North Carolina. Here's the weather. Privacy-focused email service Proton Mail is in hot water after they worked with authorities and gave information over about a user's account that led to the arrest of a Stop Cop City protester. It's still lightning round, but real quick, Proton Mail is a Swiss company and they worked with the Swiss authorities who were in turn working with the FBI. Proton Mail did not give information directly to the FBI, and they say in their terms of service that they will comply with lawful requests from the Swiss government. So they did follow their terms of service, and that doesn't make it wonderful. But anyway, yeah, no, still not great. Lev Parnas, the father of Aaron Parnas, and guy who was previously a Republican agent tasked with digging up dirt on Hunter Biden, will be running as a Democrat in the state of Florida for Congress. Given his history in trying to undermine Democrats, I think he'd make a great Democrat. A surgeon in the UK performed an operation remotely on a patient thousands of kilometers away. That's cool. It worked. It's also cool. And finally for today, the next Xbox is codenamed Project Helix, and Microsoft says that it's going to be, quote, very premium and very high-end. I am also very premium and very high-end. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you are going to call the next Xbox. My name is Endeavorance. We'll talk again soon. Take care and be well.
Over here, Endman! Oh, I'm bringing quite a few things. Hi, Endman.
If I can get this, you can get it too. In English, the sentence I ran and I built a house feel the same in their underlying logic. You're the subject, you're the one doing the work, whether it's running or building. But in ergative languages, making up about 25% of the world's languages, that isn't true. In those languages, the version of you that runs is grammatically identical to the house being built, not the person building it. Today, we're going to look at the mystery of the subject and the backwards logic of linguistics. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I've got a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania, and here on the channel, I talk about everything related to language, linguistics, language learning, and culture. If you're into those topics, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. Today, I'm going to attempt taking a notoriously challenging concept in linguistics and putting it into the simplest possible terms. It's not inherently complicated. It just requires breaking things down into smaller pieces and a slight perspective shift. Once you see it, there's a sort of elegance to the system. And, more importantly, it has recently provided us with a window into deeper aspects of human language, both in terms of how some languages see the world and how some mind-bending patterns can arise naturally. People think linguists have basically solved language, but we're talking huge discoveries in 1972 and 1978. Dozens of you have asked me to cover ergativity.
There are dozens of us.
So let's get into it. This is Language Jones. I constantly get requests for an explanation of ergativity, and it's no mystery why. It's a topic you're likely to encounter if you're at all interested in linguistics, and it's also one that is often poorly explained. I think the main reason for this is that it requires breaking our assumptions about grammar and how the world works. But, and this is crucial, it's actually not that hard to grasp once all the pieces are in place. If I can do it, you can do it. What one man can do, another can do.
What one man can do, another can do.
I'm gonna kill a bear. So I'm going to attempt to make it as clear and simple as possible. By the end of this video, you'll understand what ergativity is and how it works, what a split ergative system is, how ergativity arises, and the difference between morphological and syntactic ergativity. But in order to get there, we have to break a fundamental piece of grammar that has been simply assumed to exist since the time of the ancient Greeks. This is the mystery of the subject. Traditional approaches to grammar, going all the way back to Aristotle, posit the idea of a subject, and it's a pretty intuitive idea, especially for English speakers, and I guess for speakers of ancient Greek too. The subject is the thing we're talking about. It's the topic. It's the noun that the verb has to agree with. And in an Aristotelian framework, it's the thing that the whole rest of the sentence is commenting on. The predicate comes on the subject. A sentence like, John goes to work late every Tuesday would have the subject, John, and the predicate, literally everything else. But as with many things, when you start digging into subjects, it's more complicated and fuzzy than it seems at first glance. What's the subject of, it's going to rain? It? Is there a subject in a sentence like, Joey, what a character? Remember those old cartoons where a school of fish would swim in the shape of a bigger fish than the fish that was trying to eat the little fish in the school? No? Just me? Well, the grammatical subject, once people started questioning it seriously, is a little bit like that. From the distance, it looks like one thing. One big school of fish. But when you get closer, you realize you're looking at a lot of different things all working together, in some languages to give the appearance of being one thing. So in English and related languages, the default case is one where the topic, agent, and nominative case all line up. Let's define those. Topic is kind of intuitive, it's what we're talking about. But it doesn't have to be the other two things. So take that sentence, Joey, what a character, or President Nixon, now more than ever. The noun isn't controlling a verb. What's the verb in that sentence? And it doesn't really make sense to say there's a subject and a predicate. The 1972 campaign slogan wasn't, President Nixon is now more than ever. It just asserts a topic, President Nixon, and comments on it. And languages do this all the time. It's a main default approach to the grammar of Mandarin, which is spoken by about 2 billion people. Agent, on the other hand, is a semantic role. I've talked about these on the channel before. Semantic roles, also known as thematic roles, or theta roles, if you want to sound jargony and futuristic, but you're a huge dork, are a group of conceptual categories about what a noun is doing in a sentence. So, my dog ate my homework. The dog is the agent, the active doer, and the homework is the patient, the thing acted upon. There are others, including experiencers, themes, goals, and so on, but they don't really matter here, and linguists argue about exactly what they are and how many of them exist. Lastly, nominative case is where we start getting into circular reasoning territory. I'm going to try to avoid all that by just saying it's often the unmarked or default form of the word, and in equational sentences like X is a Y, a corgi is a dog, it's often the case on both of the nouns if the language marks case. Our concept of subject conflates all three. It's not a regular adult businessman going about his day. It's 3 children in a trench coat with sunglasses and a fake mustache. And ergative alignment just works differently. By the way, now's as good a time as any to mention that if you're into this kind of thing, I'm currently building a digital introductory course in linguistics for regular people that will cover all the topics that you'd learn in Ling 1, but better, clearer, more engaging, and a whole lot cheaper than tuition at the Ivy League I last taught at. You can sign up for updates and get on the waitlist at www.languagejones.com/blueprint if you're interested. So ergativity is doing its own thing, but how? Well, we need a couple of building blocks. First, we want to differentiate between sentences like Will left and Stevie played the piano. I think about this like once a week. So sentences with 1 noun and sentences with 2. And we also need to distinguish between thematic roles of agent, the doer, and patient, the doee, the done to. The literature on ergativity accomplishes this by comparing relationships among 3 things: S, A, P. S is essentially single and is the only participant in an intransitive sentence, the one with 1 noun. The man runs. Bernard Comrie notes that it's also perhaps intentionally evocative of subject. A is the agent in a transitive sentence, the man, and the man sees the woman. And P is the patient, the undergoer in the transitive sentence, the woman, and the man sees the woman. I'm not sure if the usual way of representing this visually works, but this is the way that it's usually done. The idea is that in nominative accusative alignment languages, what English speakers think of as the default, the agent in a transitive sentence looks the same as the only noun in an intransitive sentence. And more often than not, that's the sort of default form a noun takes, especially if you have a language with morphological case marking, meaning different shapes of the words depending on what they're doing in the sentence. In ergative absolutive languages, it's the other possible configuration, and that's actually how ergative gets its name. Ergative comes from ancient Greek ergates, worker, laborer, with the English id suffix on it. It marks the worker, the doer. Fun aside, ergates also comes from ergon, work, and that comes ultimately from Proto-Indo-European werg, whence work in English. The absolutive part is just a word that means the default, normal, everywhere, not special form of the word. So you have a usual form of the word, but when it's the worker or the doer in a transitive construction, then it gets a specific morphological marker. It gets ergative case. So to put this into imaginary ergative English using pronouns to illustrate it, it would be like if you said he saw her, but you had to say him runs for it to be grammatical, or her runs. There's a lot more cool stuff to discuss, which I'll get to in a second, but the basic idea is just this. 1, there are 2 types of sentences we care about here. Sentences with a verb and 1 noun, and sentences with a verb and 2 nouns or more. When you have 2 nouns, which one looks the same as when it's in a sentence with 1 noun, and which one gets marked somehow? And 3, I'm going to use pronouns to illustrate this using English, but it's exactly the same idea. In nominative accusative languages, the noun that appears alone, he runs, pronoun there, stays the same as when it appears with another, as the agent, the doer, the worker. He sees her. In ergative languages, you have one form of a noun or pronoun when it's the only one in the sentence, he runs. But when there's another noun in the sentence, the agent gets explicitly marked, and the patient is added in its regular default normal form. Him sees she. I'm banking on English's fixed word order being more powerful for you than English's case marking on pronouns. The idea is the man is the one seeing the woman. So there's 2 ways of doing this thing, and languages pick between them. But why on earth would any language, let alone nearly 1 in 4 of them, choose the ergative alignment? There are good historical reasons for this, and maybe choose was a strong word. Ergativity develops naturally. And I'll get to how that happens in a second. Hang in there. It's evolution. But first, let's think about the logic of why it might stick around once it's happened. Let's take a look at the new discovery of syntactic ergativity. And let's see how many people's brains can seamlessly make a switch between ergative and nominative systems on a daily basis, thanks to a linguistic gender distinction, but not the one you might be thinking of. The first important concept to understand how these systems stick around is economy of marking. The basic idea is that if you want to differentiate between 2 things, you don't need 2 markers, you need 1 marker that can be present or absent, 2 states, 1 and 0, on and off. So languages often leave the default state unmarked. In ergative systems, the absolutive, that's S and P, is the 0 marked case, while the ergative, A, the agent, is the special case, used only when disambiguation is needed. And this makes even more sense when you realize that many languages don't have fixed word order like English, so it might not be clear who's doing what to whom without marking it somehow, as I had to with who and whom. Anyway, but is ergativity really how we think about these things in our brains, or just a weird little morphological game some languages play? Well, RMW Dixon has an example from the Deerball language of Australia that he argues indicates a deeper level of ergative alignment in our thought rather than just a surface marking of nouns and pronouns. He has a pivot test for what he calls syntactic ergativity, and it goes like this. The man saw the woman and ran. So here's a question with an obvious answer. Who ran? But it's a trick question. In English, the only possible meaning of this is that the man ran. In Deerball, the only possible meaning of this is that the woman ran. After all, woman would have the same case marking in the man saw the woman and the woman ran. It's P in the first sentence, and the unpronounced noun is S in the second sentence. That's ergative alignment. This one blew my mind when I first read about it, not gonna lie. For English speakers and speakers of many European languages, the idea of being able to use ergative alignment at all sounds daunting. But
We'll end this quite easily. I wish you the best of fortune. You can actually choose. Don't get hurt.
Well, I'm gonna deal with it later. There is still one day.
was 15, the thought of an apocalypse never troubled me. The only thing I couldn't give up, even in the face of the world's end, was the sunset on that beach. Watching the sun gently slide into the water's embrace.
Welcome to the mystery of the maths trumpet. You see, approximately 6 years ago, a Reddit user wandered into the r/mathpics subreddit, and to much fanfare, they revealed this picture of a maths trumpet. Sadly, they then got exactly 0 community engagement, and then they proceeded to delete their account. So, there you go. People do not like the trumpet. Now, I forget how I came across this. Look, I searched for a lot of weird maths on the internet. Let's not get judgy here. But I found it, and I realized you can click through, and that's not the only picture of the maths trumpet. They put a whole album up. We get different angles of the maths trumpet from the side. I mean, that's either front or back on. I don't care to know. And look at that. I mean, that's head on towards -x. And this just really, this stuck with me. I'm like, that's an amazing trumpet. Like, it's such a phenomenal object, but what on earth is it? What does it mean when it says the complex values of -2 to the x? Multiple lines, something with fractional values. It's roots, right? So, to recap, both a positive times a positive gives you a positive answer, and a negative times a negative still gives you a positive answer. There are 2 options when you want a positive answer from squaring something, which means when we're looking at the square root of 4, which I'm going to write the fractional way around, that's going to be a theme today. So it's just whatever the root is, 1 over that. You've got 2 ways you can square something and get back to +4. That answer is either -2 or 2. 2 different roots. And the +1 is the principal main root, but -2 is along for the ride. And sadly, because neither of these are negative, if we had -4 to the power of 1/2, that equals nothing. I'll write that down. Nothing. Things get interesting down here in cube root town, because if we have a positive times a positive times a positive, so I'm just going to put positive cubed, that's still positive, but negative cubed, and negative times a negative times a negative, we're back in negative town. I'm going to cheat this slightly. 4 was a number I just picked to make the square roots easier, so I'm going to make it an 8 to make the cube roots easier, because that means now that if we have 8 to the power of a third, that just equals 2. And if we have -8 to the power of a third, it equals -2. So we've still got 2 solutions, but instead of both of them being when it's a positive base, we've now got 1 of each. And this is the beginning of the unraveling of the mystery trumpet. It's involving fractional powers. Fractional powers represent roots, and roots can give us multiple solutions, hence multiple lines on the mystery trumpet. However, we need to take a much closer look at this spot here, because the mystery trumpet isn't using 4 or 8, it's using -2. And so we need to work out what's going on when we're taking a fractional power of a negative number. It's about to get complex. You may remember from my previous video about fractals, I showed this GeoGebra file where I can move the complex number z around, and it shows it's squared, z squared moves accordingly. And one of the fun things we noticed was, if you take z all the way around the unit circle, and you watch z squared, it does 2 laps. And that's because for the same z squared, there are 2 different points in the complex plane that will give give it, which I can show better with this new GeoGebra file also made by my friend Sam, where now I can move complex number Z around and see both of its square roots. So before I was moving Z1 and you're seeing the squared move, now it's the reverse. And you can see there's always two solutions and they're always exactly opposite each other. So we no longer have the issue of there not being solutions. There's always two solutions when you take the square root of a complex number. And nicely, if I bring Z down to be 4, you can see, watch, Z1 and Z2, the two roots perfectly align with 2 and -2. So of course it collapses down to the real case. It's worth noting this is subtly different to the trumpet because we're only ever taking a square root, not different powers. But what I'm trying to say is if we take the square root of -2, you get 2 complex roots. The question now, though, is what about other roots, cube roots, fourth power roots, etc.? And they all work, but for those, we have to explore a fun concept I love called the roots of unity. The roots of unity are...
Plenty of historical events, very far back, are well documented by lots of different sources. The rampages of Genghis Khan, the supernova of 1054, the Justinian plague, that's because they're unusual. When something unusual happens, you write about it. You record it for posterity. We know a lot about history when the historical events we're talking about were strange to the people observing them. But a series of strange and interesting things that happened in the past isn't the definition of history. That's the definition of torch cabinet of curiosity. History is about the lives of others, how we learn about the struggles of today through the struggles of ordinary people in the past. And studying that is much harder than studying great world-changing historical events, precisely because almost nobody writes about their ordinary life. Even the most prolific diary keepers of all time devote most of their diaries to the distinctive things that happen to them from day to day because their daily routine was, well, boring. The first Polish language dictionary, published in the 1700s, included definitions like horse. Everyone knows what a horse is. Why would you write about something everyone knows? We don't know the rules to ancient Roman gladiator fights, because it's not like an ad for a baseball game today would explain the rules of baseball, right? We can be pretty sure that most of them weren't actually fights to the death, but we only know that because a small minority of posters for gladiator fights we've found specifically advertise fights to the death, implying that, again, this was unusual. Your average medieval historian can explain how Charles Martel won the Battle of Poitiers, which is something your average medieval French peasant probably wouldn't know, but the peasant could definitely make a guess at what Charles ate for breakfast that morning, which we're absolutely at a loss for. In fact, there's a debate over whether medieval Europeans ate breakfast at all. We know the names of the kings and the sites of their battles, but we don't know when in the day they ate their meals. What's more basic, normal, universal, completely unworthy of writing about than color? Isn't that a universal human experience? Don't we all see the same colors? I hope at some point you were blessed with a cool middle school teacher who told you, hey, what if we all see colors completely differently? Like, what if the color that I call green is the color you call orange? We'll never know, right? Because we'll both agree that grass is green and it's a similar color to blue, which we agree is the color of the sky, but who knows if we're literally seeing the same color or something totally different. Maybe if I had your eyes, everything would be a wildly different color and the world would look like a full-on acid trip. That's fun, but probably not true. Our cone cells, the color receptors in our eyes, certainly don't vary much from person to person as far as we can tell. Humans do, more or less, all see the same colors. But we don't describe them the same way. You and I can look at a rainbow and say Roy G. Biv. 7 easily identifiable differentiable colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. But that's because Sir Isaac Newton decided to split the color spectrum that way in his book Optics. He initially split it into 5 colors: red, yellow, green, blue, violet, which would be equally correct. It's just another way of humanity describing a constant of nature. Newton later chose to add orange and indigo so that the rainbow would have 7 colors, the same as notes in a musical scale, seemingly for no clear reason other than he thought equating color to music was a cool idea. And I'll give him that, it is. But how we partition the color spectrum varies by culture. This is a map of the Moscow Metro. Like on plenty of transit systems, the lines are color-coded. There's the orange line, the purple line, the green line, the dark blue line, the light blue line, or as Muscovites know them, the Sini line, and the Goluboy line. Dark blue and light blue are 2 entirely separate colors in the Russian language. To a Russian, they're as distinct as blue and green. You wouldn't call blue and green shades of the same color, would you? Well, they do in Japanese. In Japan, the grass and the sky are the same color, just different shades. I bet they're really confused by bluegrass music. What other color could grass be? But right up until the 19th century, the Chinese had their own distinctive color. One that they mentioned in passing a fair amount. One that was normal enough to never really get described. It was called Qing, and it doesn't easily map onto any color spectrum we know. What was the Chinese color Qing? I'm your host, Tor Parsons. These are my co-hosts, Jollibee the Durian and Thimble the Doll, and welcome to Tor's Cabinet of Curiosities. There is now a Tor store. You can get Tor's Cabinet merch. Oh yes, you can. Mugs, posters, mouse pads, t-shirts, and more at torscabinet.com/STOR. Because this ain't a store, it's a goddamn store. So you may have noticed a lot is different about this episode. I have facial hair now. Peep it now because I'm gonna shave right after this episode. I'm on a couch. There should be a Tamil dwarf breakdancing right in front of me. Do 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 do. My conspicuously absent background is arriving by UPS in a couple days because I just moved across the country. I live in New York now with my girlfriend. I'm as surprised as you, honestly. 2 weeks ago, I was in Taiwan, planning to spend the next 5 months all the way up to Chinese New Year next February there studying Mandarin. And then I realized spending long spans of time in a foreign country is a luxury I can really only do when I don't have strong attachments back home. Now I have a full-time job and a hot long-distance girlfriend.
Careful, don't get scared! Oh, for Lord Satan! My blade is already sheathed.
2 weeks ago, I was in Taiwan, planning to spend the next 5 months all the way up to Chinese New Year next February there studying Mandarin. Then I realized spending long spans of time in a foreign country is a luxury I can really only do when I don't have strong attachments back home. Now I have a full-time job and a hot long-distance girlfriend. She's at work right now because you can't hear the 80s sitcom Designing Women in the background. That's how you know she's not home. But she is no longer my long-distance girlfriend because I turned my back on Taiwan. Lovely country, nothing personal. I'll be back there before long, and moved in with her. I love being here. I've only lived here a week, but I now understand how easy it is to forget the rest of the world exists when you're in New York. But when I was in Taiwan, I realized I can access a lot of shows on Netflix that I can't find anywhere else. I don't want to give that up now that I'm back stateside. Fortunately, I don't have to, because I have a VPN. What.com. You've probably. This is a game of Go. You've probably heard of it. It's a strategy game with black and white stones where you win by surrounding your opponent's stones with your stones. It's sort of the Chinese equivalent of chess, culturally, although there's a different game called xiangqi that's sometimes just called Chinese chess. Today, in Chinese, the black and white stones in Go are called Hei for black and Bai for white. Pretty straightforward. Those are the Chinese words for black and white. But according to historical sources, the black stones were originally called Qing. Light colors were Bai, and dark colors were Qing. So Qing was a dark color, right? This is interesting because most other sources suggest it's not. The word qing isn't in common use for a color anymore in modern Mandarin Chinese. Depending on the tones you use, qing means other things, most commonly please. For example, 请给我那个榴莲. It also means the Qing dynasty, or a concept in Confucianism analogous to emotion or introspection, but those are all different words written with different characters and have no connection to the color Qing. But the word Qing for the color has been fossilized in plenty of common noun phrases, which mostly suggest Qing was a greeny blue color. Fresh vegetables are known as qingcai, or Qing food, so Qing here seems to mean green. From this, Qing has connotations of freshness and newness. Qingchun, which literally means Qing spring, as in the season, is a poetic term for youth. In other cases, Qing unambiguously means blue. The flag of the Republic of China / Taiwan has a mnemonic analogous to calling the American flag the Stars and Stripes, where the blue canton on the flag is referred to as Qing. Qingtian, Qing sky, means a deep blue sky, and you'll still hear that in weather forecasts and the like, mean like a cloudless day. The coastal city of Qingdao means Qing Island, which doesn't really offer any clues, but there's a more indicative place name using Qing, the western Chinese province of Qinghai, which means Qing Sea. The province of Qinghai is very mountainous, dry, and landlocked, and the sea in question is a lake. It is very blue.
As far as you go.
Modern Chinese has standard words for blue and green, lan and lu, which are themselves extremely old and coexisted with the word Qing for thousands of years, generally but not universally being considered shades of Qing. In today's China, if you hear something referred to as Qing without further context, that usually means sand. Qing survived into the modern day as a name for a blue or green color in some culturally Chinese places outside mainland China. I found a Reddit thread from Singapore where people reminisced about learning Qing as the word for green in school and then were confused to hear their parents or grandparents calling blue things Qing as well. That's the explanation most people tend to run with. Qing was one of those blue or green colors some languages have. It's actually quite common for people to not make the distinction between blue and green. Languages ranging from Gaelic to Turkish to Zulu either treat blue and green as two shades of the same color, or they used to. One of the first people to discover this phenomenon, although he didn't know at the time that this was the phenomenon he was discovering, was Victorian-era British Prime Minister William Gladstone. This was in the days when a good education was synonymous with the classical canon, when it was not that likely for a world leader to have ever studied calculus, economics, or game theory, but they had definitely studied Latin and ancient Greek to the point of near fluency. Gladstone was no exception. In fact, outside of politics, Gladstone was also one of his era's top experts on Homer, the ancient Greek author, not the cartoon character. And he noticed that Homer seemed to see the world in a strange array of colors. In the Iliad, honey is described as green. The sky is bronze. People and sheep have violet hair. One of Homer's most famous lines to this day is the description of the Mediterranean Sea as wine dark. Although, whether that's an example of Homer describing colors weird or just poetic license is open to a lot of debate. What's not open to debate is that Homer described colors weird. Gladstone painstakingly noted the number of times something is described with a color in the Iliad and the Odyssey put together. There are 170 uses of the color black. About 100 things are described as white. Those two vastly outnumber the rest combined. 13 things are red, 10 things are violet, although it's not totally clear if that color should translate as violet, and 6 things are yellow. A word usually translated into English as green appears a couple of times, but the things it describes are not necessarily green. Forests and meadows get described in detail, but with no colors other than black and white. Same with the sky and the ocean. There is not a single reference to the color blue. Gladstone speculated that, quote, I conclude then that the organ of color and its impressions were but partially developed among the Greeks of the heroic age. And why would this be? Well, Gladstone surmised that maybe the ancient Greeks didn't see much color because their dry, rocky Mediterranean world, predating the invention of modern-day paints and dyes and stained glass, was pretty colorless. The olive hue of the skin kept down the play of white and red. The hair tended much more uniformly than with us to darkness. The sense of color was less exercised by the culture of flowers. The sun sooner changed the spring greens of the earth into brown. Glass, one of our instruments of instruction, did not exist. The rainbow would much more rarely meet the view. The art of painting was holy, and that of dyeing was almost unknown, and we must estimate the importance of the element of this case by recollecting how much, with the advance of chemistry, the taste of this country in color has improved within the last 20 years. The artificial colors with which the human eye was conversant were chiefly the ill-defined and anything but full-bodied tints of metals. Materials, therefore, of the system of color did not offer themselves to Homer's vision as they do to ours. In other words, Gladstone seems to be arguing something like that Calvin and Hobbes comic where Calvin asks his dad why old photos are in black and white, and his dad responds that color didn't exist in the past and the world came into color in the 1930s. Speculation aside, Gladstone was on something, and it's not only Homer. That pattern Gladstone discovered. Most things get described in black and white. Occasionally things that are clearly red, like blood or wine, are described as red. Then all the other colors are very rarely used and often seem to describe things that obviously aren't that color, and there's never any mention of blue. That pattern is common across millennia of ancient literature. The German classicist Lazarus Geiger, who independently discovered the same thing as Gladstone at about the same time, in his case from reading Vedic texts from ancient India, had this fantastic quote about the Vedas. These hymns, of more than 10,000 lines, are brimming with descriptions of the heavens. Scarcely is there any subject talked about more frequently than the sun and the reddening dawn's play of color, day and night, cloud and lightning. The air and the ether are unfolded before us, and over in splendor and vivid fullness. But there's only one thing that no one would ever learn from those ancient songs who do not already know it. And that is that the sky is blue. In the 1960s, two linguists, Brent Berlin and Paul Kay, formulated what they claimed to be a near universal law of how languages describe color. In their book, Basic Color Terms, Their Universality and Evolution, they wrote that everyone the world over perceives the same 11 basic colors: black, white, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, pink, brown, and gray. But how they describe them varies by language in a finding that Berlin and Kay described as totally unexpected. There's a predictable pattern for what languages have words for what colors, and it perfectly matches the pattern Gladstone discovered in Homer. Berlin and Kay appropriately divided the classes of linguistic color terms into 7 stages. Stage 1, all languages have words for light and dark. Stage 2, if your language has a third color word, it's the word for red. Stage 3, if a language has a fourth color word, it's either green or yellow, but not both. Stage 4, if a language has a fifth color word, both green and yellow are separately defined, but blue is considered a shade of green. Stage 5, you get a word for blue. Stage 6, you get a word for brown. And stage 7, you get words for orange, pink, purple, and or gray. They allowed that there might be an 8th stage that incorporates languages that separate blue into 2 colors, like Russian, or that split red into 2 colors. Hungarian does that. Where are the other colors? In a language so simple that the only words for colors are white, black, and red, like some languages in New Guinea and the Amazon, how do you describe something that's blue? If it's the ocean, you most likely say it's dark. If it's the sky, you say it's bright. You could liken it to something else, but what? The sky and the ocean are the 2 most obvious blue things people encounter in their day-to-day lives. There aren't a lot of blue foods, blue animals, even naturally blue flowers are pretty rare. The only things you'd have to compare the ocean and sky to are each other. And those aren't the same color. Not in a language that defines most colors by light and dark. One is dark, and the other is light. When a language first evolves a term for red, it tends to cover all warm colors. Gradually, other colors split off from it, and the original term stays, exclusively referring to what we know as red. Brent and Kay give the example of Tiv, a Nigerian language with 3 basic color terms. In Tiv, all green, some blue, and some grays are Ii, but very light blues and light grays are Pupu. Nyan, which covers brown, also covers all warm colors through red to yellow. I is dark, sort of. Pupu is light, sort of. And Nyan is red, sort of. According to Berlin and Kay's theories, after centuries, possibly millennia of linguistic evolution, TIV will have words for all 11 basic colors English has words for, and E will directly translate to black, pupu to white, and nyan to red. They make a decent case for this. Berlin and Kay painstakingly go through the history of color terms in dozens of languages, some widely spoken, some obscure, seemingly finding this consistent pattern all the time. Why is this a pattern? Well, that's the biggest mystery. Berlin and Kay don't speculate. They're just describing the pattern they've discovered. The process of color word evolution continues to this day. What I said closer to the beginning about how Japanese has the same word for green and blue isn't true anymore. Over the past 100 years or so, the word ao, which referred to both green and blue, has come to exclusively mean blue, while Midori has come into use as a common word for green. Sometimes ao is still used to refer to green spring foliage, especially in poetic and historical contexts, even though to the modern ear, ao only means blue. Is this weird? Not really, because it happened in English too. English moved from Berlin and Kay's stage 6 to stage 7 in relatively recent times. We've also seen one major color divide into two over the past few hundred years. Orange! Yeah, that's right. When oranges, the fruit, were introduced to Europe from the Middle East and originally from India, oranges were described as being red, a yellowish shade of red. Only after the fruit was common did English speakers begin to mentally segregate the color orange from red. Sir Isaac Newton included orange separately from red in his 7-color partitioning of the rainbow, but again, he chose 7 colors for pretty arbitrary reasons, initially only seeing 5 colors and then throwing in orange alongside indigo, which most people don't really consider more than a shade of purple to this day. Just like poetic uses of ao in Japanese to describe things that modern Japanese people consider midori, English still has vestiges of the time orange was considered a shade of red. Why are tigers commonly described as being orange, but foxes, which are a similar color, considered red? Because the English-speaking world became aware of tigers after we became aware of oranges. Whereas when oranges arrived on English shores, we'd been living alongside foxes for millennia. I had a great misunderstanding in one of my Chinese classes in Beijing, in which I was describing in class how white people's hair varies in color a lot more than Chinese people's hair. White people's hair can be black, brown, yellow, red, to which my teacher said, "Red? There are people with naturally red hair?" And I was like, of course. Like, in Ireland, lots of people have red hair, and she kept insisting that there's no way that exists. And I finally said, do you know about Harry Potter's friend Ron? Ron has red hair. And that got her to say, oh, you mean orange hair. So I said, yes, I do mean orange hair. I knew the Chinese word for orange, but we call it red. So I imagine a Japanese student learning English announcing that in the spring in Japan, all the leaves turn a beautiful blue. And after everyone else in the room is like, blue? Seriously? Sheepishly admitting that everyone knows it's green, but they call it blue for contingent historical reasons most people don't know about. Maybe in the future, the English language will completely move beyond the vestige of the time before orange was a color. Everything orange will be described as orange, and everyone will be baffled by historical references to an apparently vanished race of Celtic people who had red hair. Historians will debate whether or not they're just talking about gingers. Let's return to the color Qing. Seems like Qing is one of those green-blue colors then, right? After all, it uses the same character as the Japanese kanji for ao. Over the past few centuries in China, we watched a language move from stage 4 to stage 5 of Berlin and Kay's scale, as the word Qing fell away and words previously used for 2 shades of Qing became green and blue, right? Even the weirder uses of the word Qing can be massaged to fit this theory. Maybe in the past the black stones in Go were blue or green. Maybe they made the stones that weren't white out of jade or something, and only in relatively recent history did they start being black. After all, ancient Chinese had plenty of other words for colors. Confucianism identifies 5 basic colors: black, white, yellow, red, and Qing, which sounds like a textbook example of Berlin and Kay's stage 4. Chinese isn't a stage 2 language like TIV, in which they have to lump green, blue, black, and gray into the same color because they don't have individual terms for them, right? Right? But Qing definitely seems to encompass green, blue, black, and gray, even though there was an independent word for black that coexisted with Qing. There was even an independent word for blue, or some shades of blue, going back that far too, and there's even a Confucian proverb that refers to Qing as being more intense than blue, separating the two. Berlin and Kay's stages don't seem to apply here. The word He for black is itself thousands of years old, but plenty of black things are traditionally considered Qing, not He. The word Xuanqing, incorporating the character Qing, means pitch black, complete darkness. If a Chinese person has beautiful, luscious black hair, that can be described as Qingsi, analogous to the epithet raven-haired in English. Speaking of ravens, in Chinese mythology, Xi Wangmu, the goddess of the West, is attended to by Qingniao, Qing birds, which are usually depicted in present-day art as being blue-green like peacocks, but sometimes Xi Wangmu is associated with a different mythological bird, three-legged crows. And sometimes the Qingniao are traditionally described as having 3 legs too, so I think they're the same thing. They're crows. Qing in the case of Qingniao means black, black and shiny, iridescent black, like a crow's feather, or like well-groomed black hair, or like the black stones in Go. Wait a minute. Let's let our friend William Gladstone talk again. I can see him jumping up and down, raising his hand. In his writings on Homer, Gladstone made it sound like he was claiming that the ancient Greeks were all colorblind. In fact, even in Gladstone's own time, people misinterpreted him this way, which made him respond, clarifying that that wasn't what he meant. Which is why it's so annoying to see people repeating this to this day. William Gladstone wrote that Homer couldn't see blue. William Gladstone thought that the ancient Greeks were all colorblind, even in sources that I like to think I trust. Radiolab, one of my biggest influences on this channel, ran an episode about Homer, Gladstone, and the history of basic color terms in 2012, in which they uncritically repeated Gladstone's quote about the organ of color and its impressions, and said, almost verbatim, that Gladstone thought all the Greeks were colorblind. Never once did they mention that Gladstone himself directly said he never meant this. He clarified what he meant, and it was something far more interesting. He said, "My meaning was substantially this, that Homer operated, in the main, upon a quantitative scale with white and black, or light and dark, for its opposite extremities, instead of the qualitative scale opened by the diversities of color." Berlin and Kay believed that separating colors by light and dark is just a phase that languages go through when they don't have a lot of words for other colors yet. Eventually, they thought, all languages converge on the same 11 well-defined colors, a cultural universal. But what if it's not? Let's return to the visible light spectrum. We see it as 7 colors because that's how Newton decided to divvy it up. But this entire spectrum only demonstrates one aspect of color, and that's the hue. As Westerners, we're used to defining colors by hue. If you ask for a definition of the word hue, I think most people would say it's a synonym for color. It's not. It's 1/3 of what makes up color. The Munsell color chart, arguably the most influential modern system used to classify color, groups colors by hue, value, and chroma, which is also called saturation. Hue means the extent to which one color can be differentiated from another. Then there's value, which means brightness. 0% value is black, 100% value is white. Chroma, or saturation, means how colorful the color is. 0% saturation is gray, 100% saturation is full color. Everything in between looks increasingly dull the lower the chroma percentage is. It's not universal to define colors by hue. What seems to be more natural is to group colors by saturation and brightness. Berlin and Kay were touching one part of the proverbial elephant. They were, more or less, right about the order in which color terms develop. But it didn't occur to them that not every language evolves toward the same 11 colors. Ancient Greek, contra Gladstone, had plenty of words for colors, including a word, kyanos, that today gets used to mean blue. But like most ancient Greek colors, the way it's used in the myths doesn't perfectly match the modern perception of blue. Homer describes Zeus's eyebrows as kyanos at one point. I want to believe that Zeus canonically had blue hair, but Homer probably meant black. Here is classicists' best attempt at reconstructing an ancient Greek color wheel. Grouping colors by brightness and warmth rather than hue, you get two words for black. Kyanos, which also encompasses dark blue, and melas, which also encompasses dark shades of warm colors. If the sky ever got described, it was lampros, which could be silvery or light blue. It was a bright, shiny color. Here's a Munsell color chart where I've marked out the area that I think maps onto the Chinese understanding of Qing. In the Munsell system, chroma seems to be the value that defines ancient Chinese color the most. Colors that are brighter but less saturated are lan or lu, blue or green. Decrease the brightness and increase the saturation, and you get to Qing. The just so story I'd tell about it is this. You have to have words for light and dark. The most vivid, visible color, the one that's hardest to map onto a light-dark spectrum, is red, so that comes next. Green is a very common color in nature. There are plenty of things you can point to and say green, so that's next, especially since it's not a warm color that could be covered by the mental color space of red. It's close enough to yellow that it can cover that, maybe, but as the bridge between cold and warm colors, you might as well have an independent name for yellow, too. The hardest stage to make the jump to is stage 4 to 5, evolving a word for blue. Plenty of cultures only did that after Western contact, and of all the basic color terms, the term for blue is most likely to be a loan word from another language. Without Western influence, plenty of languages wouldn't have progressed up Berlin and Kay's scale at all. They'd end up with 11 or 12 basic colors probably, but 11 or 12 basic colors that don't necessarily map onto any colors we know. The claims that ancient Greeks, or any culture, quote-unquote couldn't see blue are bullshit. But they didn't consider blue to be a single color. Again, only two unambiguously blue things were common sights in pre-modern times. Blue dye was incredibly hard to come by, and the two universal blue things, open water and clear skies, really aren't the same shade. I think that it's not innate to human nature at all to see the sea and the sky as the same color, which may be why Russian, long after developing a word for blue, divided it again into two colors. The sini-goluboy distinction is relatively recent. A couple hundred years ago, Russian had just one word for blue, sini, and goluboy was a shade of it. But maybe that was a stirring of something primordial. The reason there's no blue in ancient texts is because the ancients tended to see light blue and dark blue as different colors, each of which encompassed what we'd consider other colors too, and perhaps that's the default human perception of it. So, what if that hypothetical cool middle school teacher was right? What if we all see colors differently? Not physiologically, the same wavelength of light hits your eye no matter who you are, but the languages we speak color our perception. Russians would never say, English speakers can't see the color goluboy. I can see them. My temporary background is sini, and my shirt is goluboy. But even knowing that sini is dark blue and goluboy is light blue, I cannot see the mysterious goluboyness of goluboy the same way I can see the mysterious redness of red. If I trained myself to see them as separate colors, maybe I could, but as I am, I can't. I'd have to think about whether something blue is sini or goluboy for just a split second, sure, but I don't have to think at all about whether something is red or orange. Studies have shown that English speakers have a slower response time than Russians in identifying the lighter swatch of blue amid blue squares that are all otherwise darker. They're also worse at remembering which square was the lighter one. We're seeing the same hue, we're just mentally classifying it as a different color, and That's just in a language that partitions the color wheel in almost exactly the same way as English. The Russians just draw one more line than we do. I cannot come close to seeing the mysterious Qingness of Qing. Which makes me think about consciousness itself. Color perception is by far the most common example of qualia, a word philosophers use for individual subjective experiences that differentiate conscious humans from machines or zombies that simply respond to stimuli. When I look up at a clear sky, it's not just that the light of a particular blue wavelength is hitting my eye. A machine could perceive that wavelength as blue too. I am supposedly experiencing the mysterious blueness of blue. That's what means I'm conscious. I'm not a philosophical zombie, a hypothetical being that's exactly like a human but doesn't have qualia. A philosophical zombie, usually abbreviated to P-zombie, is an entity that would be completely
Alright, that's going to be it for the stream. Good luck, contact social, see you next time.